Good morning. But I'm glad to welcome you. And I'm Bronwyn Maddox, the Director and CEO of Chatham House. Thank you very, very much for coming for this really important discussion on renewing Nigeria's anti-corruption agenda. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Chatham House, but maybe not all. We are an independent, fiercely independent think tank. That's an institute that researches policy. We're based in London. We're founded in 1920 in the ashes of the First World War on the sidelines of the Paris Peace Conference. And the mission was to promote dialogue and understanding between different countries, different people, to promote the rule of law, not the rule of force, with the goal of trying to head off future wars and the terrible things that people can do to each other. And we observe that our work is not done, but still going. We've carried forward this spirit of promoting dialogue in private, and you may have heard of the famous Chatham House rule, which has now escaped our own control. It is now very much a global idea of being able to talk in private and exchange ideas without that being attributed to the people there. But a lot of what we do is in public to have the most influence, the most impact, as this conference today is. So we also conduct research. We spread our findings as widely as we can with the aim of improving the information available to all those people who are making decisions, whether they're in government, in business, in civil society. And our current mission we have refined into building a sustainably peaceful, prosperous, and just world, and a secure one too. We recognize that this is an ambitious goal, but it pushes us to extend the limits of what we can achieve in our daily work, and thank you for your part in that. We translate this mission through our research, and we'll hear more about that research today. And we ensure that the information we gather is accurate, that it is based on data and methodology. We ensure that the findings of our research and the recommendations are freely available to government, civil society, media, business, ordinary citizens. That is extremely important to us. What sets us apart, we feel, is that we are global, we are independent of any government, and we offer practical recommendations, practical solutions for some of the world's greatest challenges. We also offer a platform for difficult conversations to take place, whether at our headquarters in London or in locations like Abuja today, ensuring that we include diverse voices, often people who don't see the world at all in the same way. And we bring our work and policy recommendations where they can make the greatest impact. At the heart of our mission is the notion of the importance of improving the outcome for citizens. It's not about airy policies that governments might make in capital cities. It is also about the effect that has on people's daily lives. And the work we are discussing at today's conference is a prime example of that. I'm particularly delighted to be here today because I massively support the important work our Africa program has been doing across the continent, especially here in Nigeria. It's one of our largest programs, it's one of our oldest ones, and it has an influence on the whole of the work of Chatham House. Chatham House has a deep history of engagement on Nigeria, and today's conference is the latest link in a chain of work that goes back over 6 decades to the years just after independence. At that time, Chatham House was instrumental in the creation of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs in 1961, and it remains our sister institute, and some of us were talking to them just earlier this week in Lagos. We closely follow their work. The following year, 1962, the Nigerian government invited Chatham House to host a conference in Lagos on the foreign relations of newly independent African states. And in 2005, a special edition of our journal, academic journal, International Affairs, was launched at the NIIA. This was the first time an edition of this landmark publication had been launched outside of the UK. We were very glad that it was that one. Many of us here today may be more familiar with the recent history of convening on Nigeria at Chatham House, which has seen a lot of leaders from both government and opposition address the Institute in London. Earlier this month, we had the honour of welcoming the Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Yusuf Tuga, and I also chaired a panel at Davos in January, the World Economic Forum, where he was one of the most influential speakers. In previous years, speakers have included former presidents Olusegun Obasanjo, Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, Muhammadu Buhari, and Bola Tinubu just before he became president. We had a lot of his supporters in the square outside Chatham House. And anything we do on Nigeria goes mega on social media, as that one did. We have also hosted events with former Nigerian vice presidents Atiku Abubakar and Yemi Osinbajo, and presidential candidates Dr. Obiageli Ezekwesili, who I'm delighted to say is here with us today. Much looking forward to what she will say. Peter Obi and Rabiu Musa Kwankwaso. Fostering this kind of high-level dialogue remains an important responsibility for us. Yet our research work on Nigeria over past decades also goes far deeper than this political sphere. In recent years, Chatham House researchers have explored cross-border trade in West Africa. That was a report on Nigeria's booming borders. We've conducted research into regional dynamics, including a paper on politics and influence in northern Nigeria, Who Speaks for the North, and have published studies on resources and Nigeria's economy, including a seminal report on the theft of Nigerian crude oil. You can find all these on our website. Peace and security also remains a key facet of our Nigeria convening and research. 2021, we hosted a major conference in Lagos on maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. In 2023, we held a high-level dialogue here in Abuja on Nigeria's evolving security policy. I've just come from Lagos, where I had the opportunity, as I was saying, to visit the NIIA and have fascinating exchange of views on global politics and economics. The two are inseparable these days, with a team of researchers and department heads there. And I also had a priceless chance to meet a diverse group of business leaders, researchers and entrepreneurs, and I'm going to be meeting more here in Abuja, fizzing with ideas about the kind of things they can do, and I will be taking back some of the particular ideas on access to justice to the UK, which I think could be learned from that. Being here in Nigeria has provided an excellent opportunity to sharpen our thinking about what more we can and should do in this country and on this continent. I was particularly inspired by a group of young innovators I met yesterday at the UNDP Innovation Centre. They're using technology to tackle pressing issues such as the access to justice I just mentioned, access to electoral processes, security, governance, and much of the work they're doing aligns with the issues we're focused on and will be discussing at this conference. The largest strand of research on Nigeria at Chatham House has been in the realm of anti-corruption. And today's conference marks the culmination of a decade of work and one of the largest and longest running projects ever undertaken by our Africa program. Indeed, by any of our programs. The SNAG project, as we call it, but that stands for Social Norms and Accountable Governance, began in 2015 as a pilot study for the UK's Department for International Development. Our Africa programme partnered with experts at the University of Pennsylvania and the Nigerian National Bureau of Statistics to conduct a first household survey in 2016, exploring the social beliefs and expectations that sustain corruption, really trying to get to the roots of what is the engine of corruption. And the results were outlined in a Chatham House report in 2017, a really groundbreaking report in the behaviour change field. In 2018, Chatham House secured the generous support of the MacArthur Foundation. We're very grateful to them to expand the SNAG project's research as part of the Foundation's On Nigeria Big Bet. With MacArthur's support, a further 3 nationally representative household surveys have been conducted since 2018, with over 22,000 Nigerian households surveyed. And just standing here on the platform does not capture the effort and the skill, and in some cases courage, of many people who went to do that. We've published 5 further Chatham House research reports, including on religion and corruption, on vote markets, on procurement fraud, and we're delighted that the latest of these papers is being launched today, and the last in this series ends on a distinctly positive note about how to support the role models who choose to avoid corruption despite enormous personal cost. That is, it explicitly went into the question of what prompts people to resist being corrupt. And the results are applicable, well, they're very much drawn from the Nigerian context, something that are of applicability to many countries. We've been very proud to work closely in this with 8 different local research institutions in these states to train and equip local survey teams. They've collected data in the field, often under deeply challenging circumstances, and all kudos to them. Representatives of each survey team have travelled to Abuja to attend the conference, and we thank them for their dedication, their resilience, their commitment. Today's conference marks the final major event under this phase of the SNAG research project, which is due to conclude in June this year. We are committed to leaving a lasting legacy of the project for Nigerian researchers, including by making the full range of survey data publicly accessible for future studies. We couldn't publish all this data, there was a lot of it, but we intend to make it fully available so that others, or we in the future, can continue to draw on it and extend this work. There remains much to be learned on this issue, and Chatham House retains a deep commitment to further work in this area and to continue our long-standing engagement with Nigeria. Once again, it is my great personal honour to welcome you all to this conference and to thank you for coming at 9 a.m. in the morning, and I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Obiageli Ezekwesili, who will deliver the opening keynote address of the conference. Thank you.
Good morning. Did you guys wake up at all? Good morning.
Good morning.
I also am not sure that I'm fully awake, but we'll go for it. Rowan and the team out of Chatham House, I really want to welcome you to Nigeria and to thank you for inviting me to be an opening keynote at this very important discussion. Renewing Nigeria's anti-corruption agenda 25 years after the pathways that we've seen and continue to imagine upon reflections for change, for real change. Couldn't be a better topic at a time like this. And I had a sense of what I was going to say until yesterday. And so I have throwing away what I was going to say. And now I am going to say the things that need to be heard. I will start this speech by giving my very strong reaction to what happened last night to our democracy. The president of Nigeria decided to assault our democracy, to violate our constitution, to basically turn this society to a society without the rule of law. And every Nigerian should condemn such egregious act of contempt for a democracy that many lost their lives for, many were exiled for, but didn't have the comfort of selling rice during their exile. Many were separated from families and suffered the consequences of fighting for democracy. This democracy cannot be hijacked by a bunch of networked, corrupt people who have taken over the institutions of governance of this country. It will not happen. There are Nigerians who will resist the idea that our democracy will be desecrated in the way that we have seen. Even in the last week, we have seen a young woman, a member of the National Youth Corps, NYSC, who dared to call attention to the state of poor well-being of not just herself, but fellow citizens, with sufficient evidence to prove that she was not just being outrageous. What followed that citizens' feedback on state of governance was an attempt to trample on her right to expression. It will not happen. We will not support it, because that young woman spoke for millions of Nigerians who are suffering the consequences of poorly designed and poorly implemented economic reforms by this administration. So it is condemnable that a young woman who exemplifies what all citizens should be, people with voice to express their disenchantment and dissatisfaction with poor governance. It is condemnable that she would be trampled on for that expression of her well-being. Another thing that we've seen in the last weeks has been a senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, who had a situation with the Senate President on matter of expressing under Order 10, according to them, where it's almost like Order 10 gives you a two-hander. In other words, I must be heard kind of provision on their rules. And she expressed and was basically suspended. And every one of us who was watching that whole charade at the Senate knew that there was something unusual about the speed with which decisions were made according to the Ethics Committee on Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan. And we were wondering, what's going on here? She granted an interview where she basically said there was much more behind what happened on the floor of the Senate. What was it? She alleges that the Senate President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria had sexually harassed her at least on 2 occasions. That's an immaterial piece of information, way beyond the matter of complying with Senate rules or not complying with Senate rules. And on the matter of complying with Senate rules, Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan stated in response to those who accused her of having been suspended strictly for non-compliance with Senate rules that she only did not appear before the ethics committee that was to have a hearing with her on that incident that we all watched as Nigerians, because she was sure she would not get fair hearing. And as one interested in evidence for anything that the person says, I decided to read more and say, what was it that made you feel you would not get fair hearing? It turned out that immediately she was marched out and there was uproar in a public space on what happened that day. The staffers of the Senate President went online and began to discredit her and to allege all manner of things about her and her private life. So as far as she was concerned, she was already judged. So she went to court to say, court, restrain this ethics committee from hauling me before them. Of course, the Senate committee followed its own undue process to conclude and to present a report that we all listened to. In the report that we all listened to, which then said they were going to suspend her for 6 months, another violation of the rule of law in our country. Because there are judicial precedents that show that you cannot suspend a senator who carries the mandate of their people for 6 months. The minimum that is canvassed is some 14 days or thereabouts. Am I correct? Maximum. Oh, maximum. But they went for the kill. Not only did they go for the kill in terms of separating, alienating her from her legitimacy as the representative of her people in the Senate, they added very terrible markers of punishment. You could see that there was a very strong desire to denigrate and hold her in total indignity. And this woman wrote a petition to present, according to them, the proper way on her allegation that she had suffered sexual harassment from the Senate President of our country. And what do you think has happened? Not a thing. The Senate has refused to hold a transparent, independent session, a public hearing on the petition. And all we see from the Senate is a continuing denigration of a woman who dared to not stay silent to a thing that is a scourge. It's a global problem. Countries are addressing it, because it has an impact on the productivity of society, on the wholesomeness of society. It is not a problem that people hide away. It is a problem now being placed on the global agenda as one to be treated, because 1 out of every 3 women around the world have at one time or the other faced sexual and gender-based violence. It is not something to just dismiss. It goes to the heart of decent societies. And yet, we here held hostage by a bunch of people who think that just because they rigged themselves in one form or the other, or were properly voted into the Senate, they have taken ascendancy over the people of Nigeria. That is not democracy. And then, the matter of Rivers State. Here we are, on the matter of Rivers State. We all followed the public aspects of the fight for the soul of Rivers State. Or did you not? Even if you didn't want to, we were assaulted by it, especially on the side of the federal government, which displayed its raw power as often as possible in order to show that it had a determined aim and outcome. And yesterday, seeing clearly that there was no pathway to success, the president decided to impeach a governor of a state in this country. What are we standing here trying to discuss renewing? Anti-corruption agenda. What anti-corruption agenda? Which one? We are in a state capture situation. Our country has been taken hostage by a criminal enterprise gang that are in our legislature, in our executive, and unfortunately today in our judiciary. Because it is, don't clap for me, I don't want claps. I didn't come to get any claps. We actually should have ashes on our foreheads and grieve a country that continues to backslide with every electoral cycle. It's a backslide. There's nothing to clap about. We should be in mourning. Because one of the things we identify as the greatest adverse impact of corruption is it attains the form of the effect of cancer on a society. And you all know, when the word cancer is used, what is the next thing people think about? They think about that. Nigeria is in a state of metastasized cancer of corruption. In 2000, when I joined the administration, end of 2000, when I joined the administration of President Olusegun Obasanjo in this country, a key agenda of that administration was anti-corruption. It was not surprising. President Obasanjo had been at one time the chair of the advisory board of Transparency International. And in my own case, I've been a co-founder and a director of the global board, the pioneers of the board of Transparency International. And so Transparency International was involved in the work to design the anti-corruption agenda. of the Obasanjo administration. That is why it is not surprising that under President Olusegun Obasanjo, we saw the emergence of ICPC. I remember the work on the draft of the ICPC bill. We saw the emergence of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. We saw the emergence of the Bureau for Public Procurement, the basis on which Nigerians annoyingly call me Madam Due Process. We saw the emergence of the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. We saw the budget transparency work in the Office of Budget. Was given its own institutional identity. We saw tax reforms by Ifweko Omoigwe. We saw reforms that enabled us as executive to actually collaborate with the Public Accounts Committee in the National Assembly. We had reforms within the public sector. That is the basis of the Public Sector Reform Bureau, the Bureau for Public Sector Reform. We had reforms that bordered on preventing corruption by deregulating the sectors where corruption was most prone. That is why, for example, the information and communication technology progress that we made in this country came from these telecom sector reforms. It ended the corruption, massive corruption of a NITEL that spent over $250 billion in order to give Nigeria 500,000 fixed telephone lines. We saw multiple sets of reforms. We saw the reforms around the Office of the Auditor General and the Accountant General. Do you know why I know these reforms? Because in the economic team of President Olusegun Obasanjo, we had our different subgroups, and I was responsible for the subgroup on Nigeria's comprehensive good governance, anti-corruption, public accountability reforms. And we used to meet as a group. The GMD of NNPC would sit there, FUECOM would be there, PPSR would be there, privatization would be there, the Auditor General's office would be there. We had a structure for coordinating in a comprehensive way the reforms. What were these reforms? What were the three pillars of the reforms of that era? Number one, public engagement fostered through leadership, political will. So strong political will of the leadership was meant to demonstrate that the culture of tolerance of corruption needed to be taken off. That the society needed to understand through public education that corruption is too costly and that everybody needed to be on board to tackle corruption. So public education, leadership, by exemplary leadership examples. And so all of this went into the awareness and then the engaging civil society, engaging private sector, engaging the public sector, the whole reorientation piece. And that is the bedrock. Because until society refuses to accept the climate of corruption as a norm, nothing you do on the other pillars would work. I see your opening statement on this program, saying that after many institutions and all kinds of agencies have been created over the last 25 years, yet corruption remains prevalent and a problem at a systemic level in our country. So, a key thing that addresses that is actually when the people finally say to themselves, this is too costly for all of us. Corruption as a cancer can kill all of us. It infests the education sector, infests the health sector, infests public works and infrastructure. Oh, tell me about it. There's a thing called the Lagos Coastal Road Project. What a vexatious project. A project that did not go through any form of public procurement. A project that has all kinds of conflict of interest written over it. It's being implemented. It's the costliest ever allocation of Nigerian public treasury to a project. But in this same country, we did have the due process. And I have to tell you that in those days, I was hated by politicians. Oh my God. Was I hated by politicians? Because suddenly they said Abuja had become dry. As a result of the reforms of President Obasanjo, I hope you all know that by 2006, our external debt went from $28 billion to just $2 billion. Why? Because the rest of the world that we were owing concluded that we were serious about tackling corruption. The results earned us the debt cancellation. Massive debt cancellation. That was, we were not supposed to get, because we were not a hippie country, highly indebted, poor country. No, as an oil exporter, a large oil exporter, there was no reason for us to get the debt. But the global forces of collaboration and cooperation saw the gusto with which that administration was pushing the reforms, with the institutions, the agencies that were being created, and the efforts that were being made. Now, this centerpiece for me is that we had the values reorientation as the underpinning pillar, but then we needed the prevention and the sanction piece. The prevention piece were some of the things I mentioned. The sanctions piece were also some of the things I mentioned. You just have to have a taxonomy of the different things under those two important pillars. Were we doing anything just based on hair-brained idea of what to do? No. There were examples around the world. For me, as head of the anti-corruption sub-team within the economic team, I was reading out of the scripts of some of the countries that were engulfed in corruption once upon a time. Think about a place called Hong Kong. Hong Kong in the 70s was totally gone. Until the citizens awoke and said, no, we cannot continue with this level of corruption. It had completely decimated access to public services. And they knew that the absence of public services delivery was going to be a hindrance to attracting investment and to citizens being productive. And so the citizens came together and said, the government must address corruption. it was a turning point for Hong Kong. And then the ICSC that was established, their own version of ICPC, came into existence as a strong body. Your countryman, Sir Doville, he was one of us in Transparency International. He led that effort. Within a matter of 15 years, Hong Kong began to show up globally as a safe space for investment. That was how it became a financial nerve center of the world. Because the people said enough is enough. With due apologies to you, Yemi Adamole. The people finally had enough and said, not anymore. In New South Wales of Australia, similarly so, to the point that other Australians referred to them as a third world country in those days. And the citizens got to the point where they said, we're fed up with this. And they demanded reforms. And the government had no choice but to embark on the reforms. And it changed the tide. We've seen it in the country called Georgia. The People's Revolution was essentially, we can't breed, and we're going to change this tide. And they coalesced together and forced that revolution to lead to a new perspective on the kind of public leadership with ethics and integrity necessary to be the exemplary factor for the rest of society. Ladies and gentlemen, subsequent administrations added one thing or the other. For example, the Freedom of Information Act became an important piece of progress on our anti-corruption effort. The Whistleblowers Act is another important piece. The Treasury reform piece, an important addition. But in all of these, there is a key one that I hope your study would investigate even more. During our time, we didn't want to just simply say we're addressing corruption issues. We knew that data was important, or is important. And so we established an office called Technical Unit on Governance and Anti-Corruption Reforms, TUGA. Does it still exist? Yes. And there's a woman that, Lydia, she's still there. Oh, she's gone. Oh, she's retired. She did that work so well. We picked her from civil society to take on that work. And we began to have research on the various issues of corruption and the absence of transparency and accountability. I am bringing this to an end. And I bring it to an end by saying that societies have often thought that if only we can codify and have institutions, they assume that the existence of ICPC, EFCC would lead to the eradication of corruption. We have seen through research that that's a big, what do you call it? It's my English fails me. Is what? Is a what? Thank you. Nigerians speak really brilliant English, you know. But that's a fallacy. And so, what has been found is that a society that has normalized corruption, because corruption, as we define it in TI, is the abuse of office for private gain. And the idea of that definition is because the concentration of corruption, even though aided by the private sector, happens within the public sphere. So we have what we call petty corruption, and then we have grand corruption. And in the years that we have seen, grand corruption has enabled the multiplication and the pervasiveness of petty corruption. Because grand corruption, as that word intends, is the corruption that happens amongst the high-profile holders of power in the society. And so this networked level of corruption that we have seen has happened because grand corruption was never addressed. And so grand corruption has run over the agencies, preventing the agencies from transforming from mere agencies to institutions. There's a world of difference between an agency and an institution. The things we've created have been agencies. They haven't transited into institutions. So here we are, knowing that this is what we face. So what have we seen in terms of tracking the evolution of the systemic endemic corruption problem that we have? We went from a place of wanting to solve the problem through these multifaceted interventions, right? To a place where the punishment, sanctions piece was not immediately working to counter bad behavior whenever it happened. And that has been perpetrated by the grand people. So that led to a culture of impunity. Bad behavior without consequences. And as that multiplied in our society, every other behavior became non-rewarded. The bad behavior is highly monetized and rewarded. Good behavior is punished. Where do you think people would gravitate to? So that proliferated petty corruption. Because people who could not get to the ground level found ways, creative ways, to keep body and soul together. Why? Because corruption is a tax on effort. And since corruption is a tax on effort, the economy of Nigeria is stuck in low equilibrium performance. It's the effect, consequences of corruption. You hardly find boardrooms where people are saying Nigeria is #1 on my list in most of the world today. Because boardrooms are skittish to corruption. Is it therefore a surprise that 133 million Nigerians are stuck in multidimensional poverty? at least 60% of our population. Another 40.2% are stuck in extreme poverty. Why? Because corruption makes economic growth difficult. Economic growth, I will soon give you your platform. Economic growth is basically stifled because of the impact of corruption. Why? Public grant people make decisions not on the basis of the good of society, they make decisions for private gain. And so there is a distortion to the economy. The distortionary effect of corruption is why Nigeria has not grown in the way that it should grow. It is why Nigeria has been stuck in almost traditional level economy. When you think of what happens in our agriculture sector, for example, where the political types only care about fertilizer, for example, as a tradable, just something to buy. It doesn't go toward getting productivity for the farmers. So the adverse effect of corruption is so much. So what then does it lead to? It has led to people choosing the public space as the place of perfect wealth accumulation. If the public space is a better place to make wealth without any form of consequence or hard work, especially if the petroleum sector, that should be a transparent, competitive sector, remains a sector where the chief person controls decisions. What do you think happens? There is a permanent fight to get into that public space. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a Nigerian and you're sitting here and you're seeing what's happened at the Senate, in the National Assembly, we've seen many things. We've seen many things that they've done. Do you know that the median income for households in our country is said to be, that data is too charitable, but it says something of $2,000. But guess what it is in terms of the allowances and perquisites of our legislators? It is 90 times that amount. 90 times that amount. In the US, the median household income and the income of their lawmakers is 6 times. You're sitting, you think you have politicians that are working for you. I'm sorry for you. They are working not for you, but for themselves. And that is the perfect definition of corruption. So, ladies and gentlemen, what must we now do? What we must do is to know that no matter how much of evaluation of the institution or the agencies that we did, we would find that they are operating in breach. They are not operating to the level that they should operate. And the reason is the cankerworm of the networked corruption that infests these organizations, these entities. To that effect, therefore, I leave you with a thought. All of these agencies are the supply side of governance. But there is this demand side of governance that is absolutely essential. Today, in our country, we don't have a well-designed, concerted demand side of governance. And this is something that we must now build. The demand side of governance should be one that says, we are all together in this because we are all suffering the impact. And as Nigerians, we have decided to stare down on the criminal enterprise gang that has taken hold of our democracy. They will be in for a fight when we are ready, like the Hong Kong people, like the Georgian people, like the South Wales people, to deliver ourselves. There is no other deliverer other than each individual Nigerian activating their office of the citizen as those who will collectively hold down the politicians and tell them, thus far have you come, you go no further.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, can we give Dr. Ezekiel Sili another round of applause? This time we're clapping for the timely reminder of the challenge of corruption. So we're not clapping for her, we're clapping for that reminder that she has issued and given to us. And she's also left us with some serious questions to ponder in this session. Can we wait until the whole of society agrees that there's a need for change, that social consensus on change, or are there more pathways? Are there things we can do? Are there things that have begun? Although we may be disappointed at some of the things that have emerged in recent time, but does that change the entire trajectory of where we would like to see the change go? And joining me to consider some of these issues, permit me to call to the stage Professor Etanibi Alemika, who is the founder, chairperson, who is a professor of criminology and social law. The details of their biographies you'll find in the agenda document in front of you. If I can also call to the stage Dr. Osasui Dirisu, she'll be online, pardon me, who is the Executive Director of the Policy Innovation Center and a Senior Fellow of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. She'll be joining us online. Princess Ariro Esma Chifero from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Princess is the Anti-Corruption Coordinator. If I could also now invite Dr. Hadiza Bala Usman, who is the Special Advisor to the President of Nigeria on Policy and Coordination. Please, a round of applause for her. And last but not the least, my brother, Mr. Ode Friday, the Country Director for the Accountability Lab Nigeria. Okay, so before we begin, let me just go through a bit of housekeeping. Please, if we haven't already done so, we should put our phones on silent. We would very much appreciate that. And as Dr. Ezekiel Sili has already set the stage, I know many people are going to quote her. Not even tomorrow, she's already quoted right now as we speak. I'm sure a conversation is already going on social media. So please know that today it's a Chatham House event, quite all right, but it's not under Chatham House rules. Whatever you say can and will be used. Okay. Just to mention that our panelists will have about 5 minutes each, and we'll be looking at an evaluation, taking stock of 25 years of anti-corruption efforts in Nigeria. So, perhaps let me start with Professor Alemika and ask, you've listened to the speech, where does that leave you, sentiment-wise, of the battle to improve, or rather to curb corruption in Nigerian society? Thank you.
Thank you. I will come to a question that in the next 5 minutes that I have to look at the legal and criminal justice approach that we've adopted. I listened to the anger of Obi, and it's good that people who can still be angry. I've concluded long ago that since 1966 we have two types of government. We have the militias in government, which is the military, and we have the network organized criminals, which are the politicians. And with this, for me, I'm no longer angry because I know what to expect when you have those two categories of people in government. And it doesn't matter, I'm not a regime thinker, and all of them have behaved in very similar ways. So, if it is military, no matter who was the head of state, they have behaved like militia. In the same of civilians, they have also behaved in the similar ways, like organized criminals. So, what has happened legally over the last 25 years? We're starting from 25 years. Almost all the approaches we have today in the last 25 years have been tried in the 20 years before then. We will all remember in the 70s, especially after Muritala, we had one of the chunkiest law, which is corrupt practices behavior of 1975, which was abolished in 1979, shortly before handing over by Obasanjo. And then thereafter, you remember, I think even Wole Soyinka sang about it, ethical revolution under Shagari. And you can multiply these all through that era. But in the last 25, I think Obi had done most of the job that I'm supposed to do by recounting all the institutions. We had legal institutions established, we had policies that were broad-based. The issue is, where are we? I found some of the paradoxes. For example, of the 4 or 5 regimes we've had, administration we've had since 1999, those who have the military background were much more talkative about corruption than those who were civilians. So you find Obasanjo's 8 years was about corruption, tackling corruption. Whatever your opinion, 8 years of Buhari was also. But look at those who are civilian, Yaradua, Jonathan, and the present one. Corruption is silent. That's the first paradox I've seen in our situation. Is it what accounts for it? That we have this paradox, that it is those with military background had, this, and you can take it back to 1966. We may have to begin to look at these challenges. The second area that I think we will focus on is that with all these institutions, why are they not sustainable? 8 years of Obasanjo laid background for institution, for policy, and then another 8 years under the same party couldn't sustain it. You cannot govern a country without an ideology by which your overall performance can be evaluated. And that is why I say these are just network organized criminals. They're just pursuing their individual interests, so we can't even evaluate them because there isn't a coherent. You see, 10 years could easily be reversed. Something is wrong. Then, of course, for me, a lot of legislation. So in terms of legislation and institution, Nigeria has all that it takes, except whistleblower law. That is still the missing gap. We don't have a whistleblower. During the Buhari regime, luckily Hadiza is there, we had proposed in PACAC for a whistleblower policy, which worked for 6 months. Then they couldn't even manage how to implement that, and that, of course, has crumbled. So the law didn't work. Why do we have corruption still persisting? Usually when you have a society which has eroded anti-corruption value, there is nothing you can do. Okay, there is nothing you can do once you have that kind of situation. So I liken Nigeria problem to a situation where the next now we're ICT based, and hardware, software. The hardware is most of the thing that Nigeria has focused on. The software is your value. Once your software is corrupted, there's nothing that will work in your software. We all used to our phone, our computer. That is taking Nigeria. We have a corrupt software which is value. Until we deal with those matters, we're not going to go far. So it is not all wasted time. I think there has been improvement in interagency collaboration. We must give that to them. I think there is some competence in financial intelligence now, but a lot needs to be done. If you like, when your system is corrupted, you need what they call it. You need a virus cleaner. The question is, where are we going to get the virus cleaner? We must go back to institutions that are responsible for creating norms, because they themselves bear this corruption virus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ademika. If we can go straight to Dr. Osasui Dirisu, who's the Executive Director of the Policy Innovation Center. She's online. Dr. Dirisu.
Great. Thank you. So I'm just reflecting on tracking the impacts and limits of anti-corruption research over the past 2 decades. I mean, we've heard a lot about the complexity of the context of corruption itself. And, just being able to reflect on what would work for anti-corruption laws, for creation of specialized agencies like we've seen in the past 2 decades, EFCC, ICPC, what would work for policy advocacy, what would work for reforms underscored by all the challenges that, we have as a nation. We see the role that research has played. And although I know that it's not an exciting day to talk about corruption, but we have, over the past couple of decades, for example, evolved our understanding of corruption, reflected on indicators that can help to monitor progress. We all make reference, for example, to the Corruption Perception Index. Research has helped us to challenge some assumptions that, we previously had about corruption. So, for example, we started with this big ticket principal agent model approach. Now we're seeing something more nuanced with a collective action approach, bringing in conversations around the social and behavioral context of corruption, just trying to understand a bit, what are the root causes? What sort of interventions will work? In what context? What evidence do we have for pushing for policy and legislative reforms? And for example, what are the reasons why legislative reforms would work maybe in one sector, but would not work in another sector? So these are some of the things that research has really helped to highlight. Raising public awareness, just even people getting to engage with research findings, civil society have also been able to use insights from research to begin to do data-driven advocacy. We've seen a lot of conversations in the past decade around pushing for accountability, even in budgeting, because we now have insights, for example, that speaks to what we're seeing from budget, insights that speaks to what we're seeing from how resources are expended, and how that feeds into the bigger conversation of using evidence to inform how we reflect on corruption. We've also seen opportunities for frameworks to be developed, issues relating to, for example, assets declaration, open contracting partnerships, whistleblowing. So there's a lot that we have seen evolve, as per understanding corruption and then being able to address that. The whole conversation around the social normative environment of corruption, just understanding that when you have mental models in the negative direction, you are not really able to inspire change because people are modeling after what they see at local, state, and federal level. But there's still quite a lot of limitations. One is even being able to access data, because some of this data needs to be real time. We have not normalized the process of collecting real-time data. And it's also a reflection sometimes of lack of accountability and transparency. And then we have measurement challenges. Sometimes we're using indices that speak to corruption in the public sector. What of the private sector? What does that have to do also with, for example, the informal sector? What can we see and learn there? But if there's no data that speaks to the evidence, for example, the informal sector, then that sector begins to be a blind spot. Then also really being able to capture citizens' feedback real time, being able to ensure these are some of the limitations. Then are we able to do longitudinal studies? We see that across different political dispensations, if an initiative starts, you start to measure it. Next time you hear that, oh, this has been scrapped, and you have to go back to the drawing board, developing your tools and engaging from scratch. And then weak institutional capacity. That's something that we've also been reflecting on. When research is being conducted, which institutions can you work with, can you leverage to ensure that you can take those research findings? So one of the things that we try to do, when you're laying the foundation for a research project, you're asking yourself, who are the stakeholders we need to engage? Political economy analysis, how do we get a clear research utilization framework to ensure that once we get these findings, we can take those findings into the decision-making spaces and translate those real findings into public policy. But if these institutions that we're depending on or we expect to leverage on, for example, to translate these findings are weak, either in terms of capacity or in terms of accountability, then it becomes a weak link with really being able to translate research findings into public policy. A few things that we can begin to think about, going forward is we need to ask ourselves, how do we leverage technology? Now we have digital platforms, we can track public spending better. How do we leverage digital technology to ensure that we can upload research findings real time, of course, without people being stigmatized in the process, and then use those findings to engage citizens and get people having more conversations about this. I think the last thing I would just mention is really also now beginning to see that clear linkage between research, policy, and practice as a continuum. So previously you would have research in academic institutions, then you finish the research, you take it out to see how you can put that into decision-making spaces. So there needs to be a lot more collaboration for data transparency, for ensuring that everyone is speaking to each other, academic institutions, policymakers, civil society, even development partners, to ensure that there's a collective and shared understanding of the fact that the insights are not to punish anybody or spotlight anyone, but to ensure that we're thinking very clearly and collectively about how to take corruption from policy to practice. Thank you.
Dr. Dirisu. It's okay to clap. Okay, so Princess, looking at public perceptions of corruption, because we've heard from Professor Lemika that the software is corrupt, and we need to do something about it. Dr. Ezekwesili has also told us that except we have that social consensus on the need to do something about corruption, but do people even know what that corruption is? How do they feel about corruption in Nigeria?
Thank you, everyone. I think my intervention will speak to a bit of what Dr. Obi said and what Dr. Sasui said. And I'll take this in two ways. I'll be looking at the discrepancies between public perception and the reality, and then also how do we design effective anti-corruption strategies, using those discrepancies that are emerging. And I'll be referencing the work that we've done together with NBS, which is the National Corruption Survey, which everyone knows or don't know. So the first is, what are we seeing are the key discrepancies between public perception and reality? The thing is, it comes down to experience. There's usually a significant gap between public perception, what they hear, what they think, based on what they're reading, and their actual experiences. And that is why the corruption survey we do use an experience-based method. We ask the actual experiences, not just what you think, but did you experience this? What was it exactly? And they give us, an example. So that kind of formed that helped form the results that emerged from that survey. So, public perception, like I said, has been shaped by, what Dr. Obi said, this profile cases, the injustice and all that. But also it trickles down to the kind of experiences they have, the petty bribery, you know, and all those kind of little experiences that they have at a local level. In general, what we did find was that there was some reduction in the incidence of bribery, 63% to 8%, and I'll try not to put too many statistics here, but it was very clear that there's still skepticism. And this can be attributed to some of the things that we've been discussing here today. The factors of the fact that there's continuous investment of funds, judicial process continue to be, you know, be withheld, and so many other socio-economic factors. To be fair, corruption was regarded as only the 4th or 5th problem in Nigeria. Security, hunger, I mean there's hunger in the land, so what do you expect? But that itself is also a cry for action. Another discrepancy is around the nature of corruption itself, and often we talk about financial corruption involving money, but what about the non-financial corruption that happens? Those little things, the way people act, you know. One aspect of the research we did was the gender and social inclusion part. So sextortion, you know, women experience that, and other forms of corruption that happens that does not necessarily involve money. That is still corruption, and that is still something that still needs to be addressed. And we need to kind of know that there is some sort of good news, and I think this is usually the most interesting part of that result, is the fact that citizens are actually trying to fight back. 70% of Nigeria, and I keep repeating this all because it's good to see and hear, that 70% of Nigeria who were asked to give bribes said that no, they were not going to do so because it is the right thing to do. So we do know that we need to take action, and that in itself is a call for action and something we can build in. And I think the changing perception, again, you know, kind of aligns with some of the decline. We did see a reduction in public contact with the citizen contact with certain institutions, possibly due to digitalization of process that is emerging. And this is something that we can begin to build on. Which leads me to the last point, because I know I'm pressed for time and be strict on time. Which is about how do we use these emerging discrepancies to build, design effective anti-corruption. Actually, many of the answers have already been discussed, so really I will be repeating a lot of what people have said. The public awareness campaign that really needs to bring everybody together, but also citizens should know more about their rights. Put it in local languages so that they even understand what needs to be done. Are we really doing that enough? Because I'm sure civil societies do their best, but are we doing enough? Inclusive anti-corruption policies like whistleblower protection, are there gender-sensitive whistleblower protection, are there yeah, I'm rounding up. Yeah. And so many other things that we need to kind of consider. Strengthening local participation, like I said, we've already discussed it, so this is me repeating some of the things, the answers that were already mentioned. Leveraging technology. And I think one thing that maybe we can begin to really think about is the fact that technology is transforming the space. I did write that there is a quiet revolution happening. It may not be that citizens are coming out, but social media platforms, technology is providing an outlet for voicing our frustrations. And perhaps this could be a platform for us for change. And finally, is fostering accountability, and this is for everybody. It is not just institutions, not just the agencies, it is everybody. Citizens, you know, you and me as well, we need to kind of come together and recognize that our work and what we do is not what we say makes an impact. And I think I will stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Princess, for being time conscious.
Yes, I am.
But more especially for sharing with us that 70% of Nigerians who were surveyed said that they would rather not pay a bribe. I think this is the beginning of that social consensus. So if we're not seeing it translate into a reduction in levels of corruption, it might mean that some other things are missing. Some other things may be missing if more Nigerians are fed up now with the state of corruption. But maybe we should go to Dr. Bala Usman and to ask now on the reform efforts in the public service. And we will not look back to last night. We will ask just generally. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Soji. Recognizing public service as the core of where government anti-corruption stands sits. It's important for us to note the several layers of public service reforms that have been done in the last 20-25 years. One of the important reasons why we have public service reform is to ensure and entrench transparency and accountability in our public service. And this has been the core trust across the years where we have seen layers and layers of public service reforms being instituted. I think I'll just speak to, over the last 20 years, we've had pockets of reforms that have sought to strengthen those accountability processes. And we've seen a lot of them, as Prof has mentioned, sitting around areas you have democratic governance, where you have clarity on what is expected. We have seen different administrations speak to what they understand around public service reform. But the core part of what we've seen is that governments have recognized that institutions need to be built. These institutions have been done. The enabling acts have been provided. And what we need to do is to strengthen the core of what we recognize as the software. We've seen several layers of overlaps within agencies that are fighting corruption, and these overlaps have been recognized to be a certain extent exuberancy in setting up the agencies. People felt the need to expand. In certain instances, agencies are encroaching into other agencies, and these are areas where we need to have strengthened review of our public service, as it were. In the last few years, we have seen clarity on the need to recognize what the purpose of our agencies are. I'll speak to, for example, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. We have sought the need to engage with them to come up with a performance management charter, to recognize, one is, work backwards to say, why have you been set up? You were set up on this basis. What informed the basis where the organization was set up? In the last X number of years, how has the organization fared within that period? And importantly, what are the indicators that speak to the performance? We've seen where we celebrate, we've had X number of convictions. Are they convictions? Is conviction listing or numbers what signifies an increase in addressing financial crimes in the country? Is it building institutions that would prevent us from corrupt practices? We have seen where government institutions, it's quite mind-boggling how such corrupt practices are done. So it speaks to how have those institutions been ring-fenced to prevent such corrupt practices, as opposed to strengthening and pushing to see how you can convict people, but build strong institutions that will ring-fence the processes that will not enable such corrupt practices. This is something that the EFCC is working with my office to come up with the performance management charter, and also they have established departments that recognize, they call it like fraud risk assessment departments, that look to see what needs to be done to ring-fence and prevent fraud from starting up. The other aspect that Princess spoke to around citizen engagement. Citizen engagement is core, and one of the things that we need to look at around the years of our public service reform is to look at what we need to do to demystify governance, digitize processes. When you digitize process, you remove human intervention, and human intervention is core where you have rent seeking happening within the value chain of any approval process. Or you have a system where I need to come to X office, knock on the door, get them to sign my permit or sign my approval physically. It allows and gives room for rent seeking. One of the strong areas, I think, because I worked in that sector, the maritime sector, ports, clearance of cargo, is a core, I would say, opaque system that allows for rent seeking. And it allows for people to intervene and engage, or I need to have my cargo cleared. So one of the things that we've been working on in the last 5 years, but it's gotten the approval, is establishment of a national single windows, which would enable agencies to operate electronically, which in turn removes you physically going to meet every agency that has to do with a cargo clearance process. And I think recognizing digitization as a core tool that public service needs to institutionalize strongly to enable removal of human intervention across the processes. I'll also quickly speak to the issue of our plugin. Which is about value reorientation as a people and in public service, is where you have the perception that I need to have a plug-in somewhere to get anything done. And I think this is where you have young people feeling, I can't go somewhere and fill out a form and get it done. I need to have a plug-in is a process that circumvents what needs to be done. And that, to me, is a part of corrupt practices. Corruption is not just you paying for something. If an NYSC student have applied on the portal, why would my name not come on? Why do I have to have a plug-in in NYSC? So such language and such conduct that we allow in public service strengthens or enables and provides us with this idea that plugins are all allowed, but plugins are part of corrupt practices. These are areas where people feel they need to find someone to pay to get things done. Quickly speaking to a few things that we're doing is around the Public Procurement Act. Public procurement is a core area where we have a huge corrupt practices within public service. The Public Procurement Act was signed in 2007. There's a current review of the Public Procurement Act to look to see the gaps that exist and what needs to be done to improve upon it. In the last X number of years, people are now able to circumvent the process of the public procurement to continuously ask for selective tendering when it's not applicable. Every procurement is an emergency. Every procurement is me, myself, and I. So we're reviewing the public procurement to ensure that such activities are addressed and the public procurement is strengthened to prevent the loopholes, inaugurate the Public Procurement Council. There are aspects of the Act that have not been done which allows for corrupt practices within the public service. Quickly speaking to there's a tax reform bill that has been passed by the House of Representatives, going to the Senate. It seeks to consolidate revenue nets so that way all revenue generating agencies, to me that's one of the strongest parts of the bill, which addresses public service corruption. It streamlines all the revenue heads, that way you're able to pinpoint and see where your revenue streams are coming from as a government. So public service reform is core to preventing corrupt practices. For me, digitization, removing human intervention, value reorientation, addressing, I'll say, archaic and older bills that we as a people, as public servants, we found loopholes in those bills, addressing those bills and preventing continued, I'll say, disregard for rules and regulations and prevention of corrupt practices. Thank you, Soji, for the extra few seconds.
Thank you very much. It was a bit more generous than a few seconds. Thank you very much indeed. So, Audit, the role of the Nigerian civil society in tackling corruption. I mean, that is a huge thing to discuss in 5 minutes, but you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Soji. I mean, it's very huge in 5 minutes because Dr. Obi has already said the president. When she speaks, it's very huge. One of the things I think I want to start with is when she mentioned the issue of state capture. I mean, over the years, we've struggled with lack of accountability, corruption, as we may call it, over the years. I grew up in the military barracks, and I transited to moving out. My father retired. Then now I'm in more like a civil society space. People in the room have worked before me, and the issue still persists. At the moment, it's quite striking for me for the past few days and traumatizing again for civil society organizations who have been trying to strategize around these issues and trying to find ways in which we can address these issues. But it doesn't stop. It just gets tougher and tougher with the state capture we have seen. But I mean, the conversation is never for such a time than this on thinking about our renewal for anti-corruption strategy. Challenges we face with civil society organization. Number one, if you ask anybody in any civil society at the point, funding will be the number one problem, funding will be the number two problem, funding will be the number three problem. But nevertheless, Just a couple of weeks ago, civil society over the media, over social media, have been strangled because the citizens and as well as propaganda people who are online have tried to stifle this discussion in ways that shows that civil society are not actually doing anything. For some other organizations within who have received US government funding, they had received a letter. I'm not sure if a couple of people are aware in the room. They had received a letter to say you have to send your audit reports, your annual reports, how much you received in the last 10 years. Some organizations were not created in the last 5-6 years. Some of the policies or the laws which calls for this, some regulatory demands it has not come into existence like 5 years ago, but you're asking for 10 years. But this also shows how the government is trying to stifle civil society and also shrink the civic space, which becomes a bigger issue for not just funding on how we sustain with international donor funding. And if most of us that understand, we will know that every money that comes in through every civil society organization is reported to the National Planning Commission. So why not go to National Planning Commission to ask for those reports? Why not go to FIRS to ask for filing report? Why not go to CAC to ask for those documentation? But you still come back to civil society to ask for 10 years in terms of how they have funded terrorism. So again, I've worked in a couple of civil society organizations which also mandates every civil society organization to have an anti-terrorism policy, which we have all signed. But again, you are still stifling civil society voices. Another challenge will be around the weak institutional frameworks. Despite our anti-corruption laws, I'm happy to see a colleague from the Code of Conduct Bureau here. Over the years, civil society have fought for, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but this is about asset declaration for government officials. When we come to you to use the freedom of information to tell us what has happened, it becomes a fight between governments and civil society. But again, that is what anti-corruption agencies are supposed to do. EFCC and ICPC have also selected issue which they work on. I mean, one of the major challenges civil society work on has to do with fighting inequalities as well as the injustices. We all are under the Nigerian constitutions and the law should apply to all of us equally. But when anti-corruption agencies choose who to fight independently of what the issues are, if I steal a goat today, we've seen cases for people who steal goats and go to jail for 5 years. We've seen people who are in court or in jail to see, thank you, 1 minute. We've seen people in jail who don't have a case, but again, people who are in political office, in the last Senate president election, if you check, the 3 contestants had allegedly cases of corruption against them, but these are the people who are ruling us. Just to jump again, please forgive me. One of the things we found out with Chatham House report, previous reports, 8 out of 10 Nigerians believe corruption is wrong. Secondly, Afrobarometer report has also shown that 12% of Nigerians generally trust public institutions. Dr. Obi has just put that to us that they are just agencies, but now not institutions. But how do we begin to strengthen them? For strategies for civil society, we've tried to advocate for legal and institutional reforms, collaborative actions through the OGP. Even the MacArthur Foundation has even given us that privilege for us to collaborate within ourselves on different cohorts. For driving change, we've seen to engage citizens. Citizens are becoming discontented, not interested in conversations around governance because of what is happening at the front line of every daily newspaper without anti-corruption agencies taking any charge. But for me, real accountability will take time. It's not a quick fix, but civil society, we're not just fighting corruption, we're fighting for Nigeria's future. I think it's time to make accountability the norm and not the exception. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Audit. I think this is the Audit. Okay. I can project my voice a bit more. Okay. Good. Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I really wish we had a lot more time for each of the panelists, but we have to come to our engagement with you. So your questions to the panelists will give the opportunity. But before I go on, you might recognize in the inside of your agenda booklets that there are these QR codes, and there are engagements going on Mentimeter. The first one is to share your views on Mentimeter, and the second is to explore the project outputs from the SNAG project. So you might want to look at that. And I'll take this opportunity also to finally introduce myself. My name is Soji Abampa. I'm one of the founders of the Integrity Organization. I wanted to make sure we had enough time for our panelists. But there's a very interesting thing that has come out of all that has been discussed so far. That it is not that Nigerians are not fed up. They are. Something more is missing that can galvanize the way people feel. Because if you saw the social media rant of the young lady a few days ago, you will know that this is from a person that is sick and tired of what is going on, and there are many more like her. But what to do about it is what seems to be failing many Nigerians. How do we come together? May I also mention that in Dr. Dirisu's speech, she talked about collective action, that a lot more is happening these days through collective action. And I would like to say that in particular in the maritime sector, collective action, especially around vessel clearance, has reduced the levels of corruption. So much so that bringing a vessel to Nigeria that used to cost, on average, extra cost, $150,000, now has crashed to about $20,000 per visit. And this is not us in Nigeria saying so, it's the actors who are now calling it the Nigerian miracle. So things have happened involving the Nigerian government, involving the private sector, involving civil society, albeit it's been a project that's been on since 2012. It has taken many, many years to get there. So perhaps there is something more that we need to add to our dissatisfaction and to our reforms. Maybe there is a coordination beyond the one that we're doing, but we will leave it to you. You ask the questions, it's your turn, but please when you get up to ask a question, please let us know your name and your affiliation, and please not a comment, just a question, so I don't have to jump in. Thank you. Mr. Otive Buzo, yes, and then the two ladies in the corridor here, then I'll come back to you, sir.
My name is Otive.
Please also let us know who the question is for.
Okay. My name is Otive Buzo. I'm the founding executive director of the African Center for Leadership Strategy and Development. My question is to Hadiza. I was very happy when I heard her talk about Public Procurement Act 2007. That Public Procurement Act has survived 4 presidents without establishing the Procurement Council. So when are we expecting that? And
okay, that's question 1.
Well, yeah. The other question, any of the panelists.
Okay.
You know, from our own reflections, there are 4 pathways to improve accountability. One is the MDs themselves, the internal systems they have in place, the procurement mechanism they have in place, the M&E, and all of those systems. 2, that's all over the world. 2 is legislation, parliament, legislative oversight. All the public agencies have one committee oversighting them. And 3 is the independent institutions. And then 4, civil society. For the civil society, we know that the way to organize in a place where there is capture is social movement organizing. When is civil society in Nigeria going to up their game in terms of social movement organizing?
Thank you very much. Yes, the lady here.
Good morning. My name is Khadijat Akeoshola. I work with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. My question is to both Dr. Dirisu and Ms. Bala Usman. So my question is going to be based on the fact that we've all agreed that over the years we've built a lot of institutions and that has not improved our situation per se. And I mean, it's not just Nigeria, we're seeing it even in America now, that it's not just about building institutions. So there's something that we have been thinking about in the sense of what are we doing to build good people? Something that goes beyond institutions to the people that are behind this institution. Because if you set up EFCC, ICPC, at the end of the day, there are still going to be people behind them. So what are we doing to drive cultural change within the people? Something that moves beyond even legality to morality, where people just have a minimum standard of the law that we cannot get to. Because right now in Nigeria, we don't even know what the minimum standard is. We wake up tomorrow and it's a new level of law. So please, what is your office doing? And I'm directing it to Dr. Dirisu because I know they work on behavioral insight. So what are they doing to ensure that we focus on the behavioral pattern that happens, that fosters this anti-corruption? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Matter of fact, she just hit some nail I was going to also talk about. I am Ejiro Mokoro. I am the Executive Director for Lightroom Media. I found the conversation, Audit Friday spoke about the Freedom of Information Act. Because at the core of holding accountability is the power of data. At the core of data collection is also the ability to be able to analyze the data to influence actions, influence behavior, and certain outcomes that are desired. What I want to find out from you, because I'm also in that space where I'm analyzing why is it such a difficulty, right, getting the MDAs, the agencies, from your own perspective and your interaction, why is their unwillingness, despite the FOI Act since 2014, vis-a-vis the conversation of the Secret Oaths Act, which some of them just drum up, right? And then the conversation about a typical civil servant, right, in your space that you work. Why is there a disconnect between understanding that you're providing a data, and I think Hadiza spoke to that, you're providing a data, and who else? Someone else spoke about practice, policy, as well as research. I think Dr. Dirisu said that. All of these show something that we can address an issue, but if we cannot have that data, my question is to you, Audit Friday, what do you think we can do to convince those within this space that need to provide us public information so that we can deal with the crisis we have to hand? Then the second, I'm going to go to Princess, the second one is with regard to behavior. The reason for this is this. We've been repeating the same problem. It's a question, yes. We've been repeating the same problem. It's like Nigeria is a virus on steroids, giving birth to several human steroids who repeat the same pattern and practices of its ancient ancestors since the 1400s till date. My question is this. Based on your study and your analysis of behavioral patterns, because you said a very key point, and I think you also made mention of that too, our chair, Sochi, you said that Nigerians don't want to be involved in corruption. They say no to it. The question is, why is it so pervasive, especially in the centers where the modeling for it to not become, as Madam Ezekwesili rightly said, not become a grand corruption that stimulates the petty corruption to what it is today?
Okay, so that's a lot of questions for this round. We'll come back to you, sir. Dr. Bala Usman, do you want to start?
It's like you're calling my dad's name. I'm just like that, right? On Public Procurement Act and the Constitution of the Public Procurement Council, this is something The review has been concluded. It's waiting to be presented to Federal Executive Council. The memos have all been done. This committee that was set up, it had a team from the World Bank, it had KPMG, it had people from public procurement, the Bureau for Public Procurement. So that has all been done. So it's ready to be presented. So hopefully within the next 4 to 5 weeks, we should be able to have an approval arising from those activities. But historically, when I have engaged on the inability to constitute the council, some of the people have raised concerns or observations about the chairmanship of the council, the membership of the council, and the role and functions of the council. So one of the things that drove the need for review of the public procurement Act spoke to the evident corrupt practices that sit within public procurement. We have seen the Bureau itself being enmeshed in a lot of inconsistencies. We've seen where MDAs, ministers, are pushing procurement processes that are outside of the Public Procurement Act. We've seen circulars being ignored, and I think the totality of the public service has abused the Public Procurement Act and have found loopholes. So this review has been done. To what extent does it address the issue? And I think we need to have more eyes on the outcome. I have raised the observation that before it's approved, we need to have a larger, more robust engagement from the outside. Because, for example, every procurement is emergency, every procurement is shortlist. There is no more advertisement, and you have cut off everyone from participating in public procurement. So that is a core thing that we've identified. This issue on that you spoke about value orientation, and I think these cultural change. National Orientation Agency has started doing things regarding that. I saw an advert on CNN. I did not think CNN was the right place to have an advert for Nigerian value orientation, but that's their own perception. But I think these are cultural changes that we must imbibe, and I always say that be the change you want. So you as a person need to imbibe that. So no plugins, stay on the line when you go to the airport, focus. And so I think there are fundamental things that need to be done. There is values and ethics. I think the Ministry of Information is working on this document that is supposed to trigger this. I've been invited to run on the committee. I haven't attended, so within the next quarter you'll be able to see something. But I think fundamentally you need to be the change you want to be. You need to take those steps yourself and ensure that in my world I conduct myself in the manner that recognizes what I want to see from citizens. So when you walk into the airport, you want to go to the front line, you have the idea that you're VIP, you deserve to be treated better. You have the idea that circumventing processes and having plugins in everything is the right thing to do. We must discourage that by allowing the proper process to happen. I remember one time I got the road safety people stopped me and they asked for my license, and I gave them my license, and they said, oh, this is a fake license that you have. And I said, well, yes, because your process is so cumbersome. It takes me, I've been to your office, I went to capture, I was there, waited for hours, went back again. And at that time, it was Osita Chidoka, and I knew Osita, but I didn't call him. I said, I've been on this for months. I got tired and I sent someone to Nasara to do it for me. So if you make your processes simpler and you demystify governance, it allows for people's default is not to do the wrong thing. But when you have an institution that refuses the right thing. So I remember when I was in MP, I said it's easier for you to, it's harder to do the right thing. It's easier to do the bad thing. So when you say, where are my entitlements? Just to speak like, I need to have my entitlement, my housing allowance paid to me. And they're like, oh, you need to do this, madam. But you know, madam, this contractor can just pay the rent for you, and then you can now engage him. That was what I personally experienced. Like, no, my entitlement says this. Can I process this and get out? So you have a system where it's easier to do the wrong thing than the right thing, because once you say, I want to go through the process, it becomes a big issue. When I was learning how to drive, my father took us to driving school. For us, the people said, oh, just come and get it. When he came himself, they now stopped everything, took us through the whole rigmarole, and everybody was laughing at us that you didn't have to do this, but because it was your father that came, they decided to do the proper process. So knowing that being subjected to, it's easier to do the wrong thing than the right thing is what we need to move away from. Government processes that require permits, approval should be demystified so people are able to do it. Your default is not to be wrong, but when being right takes you years to get anything done, you now decide, you know what, you have the full going through the process, just go to Nasara and get your fake driver's license and move on. So I think that's the last question. On data, data is, there's difference between data and information. So when you want information, for example, under the Freedom of Information Act, asking, I need you to give me data on so and so's code of conduct form, for example. So there's difference between that and also data. What I've realized in my job and central result delivery is that there's an absence of data collection, meaning that organizations, public, don't seem to know what data collection is or why data collection is necessary. So there's no empirical data to validate work. So you have a ministry that is working and is not able to give you clear data. So for example, we say, what's our yield per hectare for rice in this region, and how are you improving? When you give this input, what have you done to improve on that yield per hectare? It becomes a big conversation that the data is already available. So there's that type of data that I'm struggling now to strengthen MBS, to have every sector invest in data collection itself to validate some of the numbers we have. Development partners own some of our data. We throw about numbers that are not numbers that we have done, and that is when you're planning without data, you're just flying. It just doesn't make sense. But that is where we are as a country in terms of data. Trying to strengthen that is a big issue. Two is information. To what extent are they giving the information to enable advocacy by the civil society? To what extent will civil society use that information for advocacy and not blackmail? So these are some of the things that we need to look at in ensuring that we provide the information when we're asked, and we also use the information judiciously for what is expected to be. And in opening things up and allowing for whatever form it is from the beginning, it is the public space. So when you develop systems where ab initio, the information required from day one is already public, so you don't need to ask permission for that information. So we may need to get to where our Freedom of Information Act compels certain data information sets to be available from the beginning. So you are not asking anyone to give it to you, but there's a repository in that sector where you can go and pull out that data. I think these are some of the amendments we want to see in the Freedom of Information Act. Thank you.
So, Ode, very briefly, please.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tiwi. I think I appreciate you mentioning the 4 pathways to accountability and how do we begin to develop or build social movements. One thing I just noted the 4 of them, and just giving you the foundation of the state capture again. Look at the procurement process. We mentioned the Calabar Coastal Highway. If you look at Abuja, everybody celebrates the fact that Abuja is opening up. But I mean, write an FOI to the FCT Minister or FCD and look at the response you get. State capture. Number 2, look at this parliament. I mentioned the situation with the leadership. State capture. Number 3, look at independent institutions around. I'll mention INEC. INEC has a challenge which civil society have been talking about for the past few years. The resident electoral commissioners are all aligned to one political party, which is the ruling party again. That clearly states state capture. So how do you begin to build social movements for the last option which we have, civil society? We're beginning to see those traits even embedded in civil society where there's political influence in some civil society organizations. So when you try to build a social movement, even as simple as a protest, you find a disconnect between political affiliates within these conversations, trying to disrupt the whole conversation. But nevertheless, for my own suggestion personally, I would think the opportunities to begin to build coalitions in ways that resonate with the people. People are no longer interested in governance issues because they feel like corruption issues are not being addressed. Every day we keep mentioning this. But the coalitions we need to begin to talk about needs to cut across civil society, government institutions, private sector, as well as the media. I mean, those things are still also existent. But you now also look at what does this mean? If NLC has an issue with increase in salary, I mean, they fight their battle. Where is the coalition to support them? Where do we have those kind of concerns? If media or journalists are being captured because they're reporting news on accountability, where is the coalition? So I think for social movements, we need to rethink our approach to building coalitions and how effective they are. The second will be also talking about restrictive laws, which have also pressed down. It just keeps strangling civil society, so sometimes you are struggling to breathe. But again, the laws there are pushing you down. The other question I think I want to respond to you as well, talking about the disconnect with access to information, what can we do? I think for civil society organizations over the years, I think for learning for us as well, first of all, we try to make information available. So we have the freedom of information, which now some organizations now respond to providing information. Secondly, there's access to that information, which means the freedom of information is also ensuring that we have access in ways that are not being shut down. The third will be, how do you even use that information? So sometimes, again, I'll commend some of our colleagues in the room to mention budgets. They now do infographics in ways that people get excited to see. What does this even mean? What does the national budget mean? What does procurement data mean when I even get them? I'll give you an instance. We do some work in the Niger Delta on the Petroleum Industry Host Community Development Funds. We had written a Freedom of Information request to NUPRC, the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission. And they came back to us on the information and said this information is commercial in nature and they can't release it. What is this information? The Host Community Development Trust Fund provides a 3% of annual operating costs for oil companies operating in the Niger Delta. For this to be put into that fund to develop these communities. Now the communities don't even know how much they earn. They don't even know what these funds are between the board of trustees, the management committees, and the advisory committees. So we said, make available these funds so we can engage with these communities so they know what, in terms of community development plans and how they will structure their plan. But NUPRC says to us, this is commercial in nature. So again, this kind of information, this kind of engagement makes it difficult, but again, what can civil society do? We'll keep pushing. We'll keep engaging with the anti-corruption agencies to ensure information is accessible to everybody in meaningful ways. Thank you.
So, Princess, very briefly, please.
Yes, I will be brief. Because, Adrian, I got your question correct. He wanted to know if we asked the question about why corruption was so pervasive, right? This is what I got from the question. If our data, our research covered that. Is it? Yeah. Okay. Right. So, no. We only touched on the what, and what happened, what are your experiences, and then also the policy recommendations more the how. Now the question you ask is actually complemented by the work Chatham House actually. Why is it, so the behavioral part, why people do what they do, let me put it that way, is covered by Chatham House research report, so it complements the work we do, as it were. So very straightforward answer.
Thank you very much. I believe there was a question to Dr. Dirisu, if she would like to respond.
Okay, thank you so much. Just quickly, the context we find ourselves will always affect what we do subconsciously. Last year, I traveled on the same flight with a high-profile person, and I just had that unique opportunity to observe him in Nigeria and in London. So in Nigeria, he went through security, was a bit very rude, didn't even want to drop his phones and his key holder. Everything was beeping as he was going, and he just walked past security. When we got to London, he removed his shoes, his belt, everything complied to the letter. So the same person in a different context. So we at the Policy Innovation Center, we recognize this, and a lot of our work centers around how we can use lessons from behavioral science to address some of those social normative issues that make corruption a bit more accepted. For example, when you say thank you to someone in Nigeria, it's different from when you say thank you or help your people. All those things have different meanings. We've had an opportunity to apply this in many ways in the past couple of years, looking at ethical behavior regarding exam malpractice. We did some work in Abuja, demonstrated how we can create ethical behavioral principles, working collectively with young people, because over 70% of the students we surveyed on that work said if they have an opportunity to cheat in an exam, they will do so. So what is keeping them from doing that is just that opportunity conversation. So we've applied this energy theft, building collapse. We've looked at how we can really create a more inclusive approach to addressing corruption within the legal frameworks, but addressing issues relating to social norms and that collective understanding or shared understanding of the benefits in quotes of corruption, disregarding, of course, the long-term consequences. But a lot of these things, we will keep sharing these insights, and we are hoping that, working with civil societies, NGOs, and government, we can begin to take some of these lessons from research and actually begin to apply them. But a word of caution here, irrespective of what we do at different levels, we still need strong political commitment and signaling to ensure that all these different collective efforts can actually address long-term embedded, corrupt practices. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We finished one round of questions. I don't know if we have any more time because we were supposed to finish at 11. Sorry? We can go on. Thank you so much. Okay, but before I give you the opportunity to ask your question, what I'm hearing repeatedly is that example is leadership in this new phase, and secondly, that there is an absence of consequences. There's no consequence management. And because of the lack of consequences, impunity continues. And that perhaps this is one great thing. You also mentioned that people should stay online. But when they keep seeing big people come and jump the queue, then they feel, why should I then have to remain on the queue? And when we see those vehicles with sirens and everything go up a one-way street, and other cars follow them, and we see road safety unable to do anything, and yet it was just the driver in that vehicle. But he knows that if he's held, his boss is going to rain down on those officials. Until we stop that level of impunity, it will be very difficult for ordinary citizens to find their voice and their power to express their 70% not willing to give a bribe, and so on. Okay, our last round of questions then. Very quickly, sir. Your name and affiliation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wilson Babangida Abuti. I'm an SDG ambassador and the Chief Operating Officer, Community Impact Affinity, popularly known as CIA. My question is towards addressing the social and structural drivers of corruption. Corruption in Nigeria is considered...
Question or comment, sir?
Question now,
okay.
please. In Nigeria, corruption is considered as endemic, and my question is, to what extent is this a product of social norms, weak institutions, or even political incentives? And I would appreciate if these are our princesses attend to that. Thank you.
Okay, can we have two more? Just two more. Okay, the gentleman right at the back in the black and white, Dr. Zasha, and the gentleman in front of him, right here. The lady is trying to force herself in. It is acknowledged.
My name is James Zasha. I work in political economy and governance. My question is directed to Professor Lenika. I like the idea of the software being corrupt. And you spoke about the need to go back to the institutions responsible for creating values. Can you add more light to that, please?
Okay, can you pass the mic to the gentleman?
My name is Jinedun Moku. I'm a public financial management expert. I recognize the reforms mentioned by Dr. Begede Zekwesili, because at the time that was happening, I had the opportunity of working with the World Bank, and we helped a lot to promote and push the reforms. And I'm making this preface because my questions are two questions going to be directed to the government representative, Dr. Hadiza. When I left the World Bank, I happened to work for SNAG, administering a governance reform facility, which I tried to use to further some of the reforms that we are promoting in the government there with the government with the government. For instance, the part of the reforms that Dr. Ezek was talking about was audit reforms. The Audit Commission Act or bill was formulated at that time and pushed through the National Assembly. It was passed just before Obasanjo left office. It was on his table. When his successor, Yar'Adua, came into office, he did not sign it. It was passed at the same time with the Public Procurement Act and the Freedom of Information. Now, he signed the Public Procurement Act, but he did not sign the Audit Act. In 2000 and...
Your question, sir.
My question is, please, are you going to, Dr. Hadiza, put this into your agenda? Because twice since then, efforts have been made to pass this act, it didn't go through. You know, I made the efforts in 2008, and in 2018, what arm of National Assembly passed it, and it was not, the other arm didn't pass it. And just, if we don't have an audit reform act, then there's a lot going to be going wrong in the government. The second arm of my question is, I don't know if you are aware that not all the revenues that the government collects is profiled into the chiefness. In other words, the government integrated financial management information system and the treasury. If you look at the audit reports published by the government's auditor, you will see that at least there are at least 42 public accounts that are not profiled into the GFAs. It's there for the public to see. Now, does the reform we are pushing now include ensuring that all the revenues mentioned, at least mentioned in the audit report, are profiled into the GFMIS, so we have something very comprehensive? Thank you.
Okay. And by force, the lady in front.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Judith Bagidi. I'm with Action Aid Nigeria. Thanks to Dr. Tire, he has asked one of my questions on social mobilization. So my second question is related to the fact that we all talked about technology, digitalizing and all. And I'm wondering, this data and this digital system we're going into, are we really safe there? Do we really have rights in those spaces? Because we have young people who came out for protests at different times during the election, during the Independence Day and also the End Bad Governance. We have young people who have still been thrown up in court cases who are being charged for treason. And do we know what treason is? For people who just came out to speak up. And how did they get to these people? Through data, digital tools. They were able to go to their houses to pick them up. And then we have insecurity in the country and we can't trace those people, but yet young people are being charged for treason because they have access to these digital things. Are we really safe? Do we have a right in that aspect? Thank you.
Okay. So do you want to go first? And then Professor Adam.
I would respond to those directly addressed to me. The Audit Reform Act, I would find out about it and I would take it on to see where it is to ensure it's done. I'm not familiar with anything about the Audit Reform Act. I've engaged with the Auditor General of the Federation where he has raised observation about his funding and his inability to do his work, but I'll take that on to see what the challenges are and why it's been unable to be pushed through. Regarding the revenue collections into the GIFMIS, the Tax Reform Act is mopping up all revenue heads. So that will be addressed once this Tax Reform Act, the bill, is passed by the Senate. It would ensure that all revenue heads are domiciled within one umbrella. The question about social norms that you asked regarding if corruption is a social norm, is it? Yes. So one of the things we see around the social aspect is the way citizens celebrate wealth that you have no knowledge of. So how we have evolved as a society to accept and celebrate the unknown wealth, as it were, the inability for us to distinguish between what is recognized as a legitimate income and what is recognized as a lack of clarity of where income comes, where young people celebrate wealth from nowhere, where people are encouraged to loot as much as you can, ensure you have enough for the lawyer and the judiciary. That's what it said when you're in public office. So all of these, I think, are social ways where our country, our system is entrenching corrupt practices, because we are seeming to accept and celebrate things where people are living a life that is outside of their legitimate income, where you cannot see where they've paid those taxes, where people mention the fact that I'm a wealthy person, and you ask, how are you wealthy? What taxes have you paid? What enterprise do you have? What business have you done? People that have worked in public service for 30 years will sit in front of you and say, I'm a wealthy person. Wealthy by the salary you earned in the last 20 years. So these are the things that I don't know how we lost it as a people. We seem to move away and celebrate that, and we move to encourage our younger generation to seek for wealth irrespective of where it comes from. Just get it, that's what matters. And when I see people and I know, and I'm wondering, like, seriously, how, okay, if you say you have a nightclub, how many bottles of Hennessy could you have sold to enable you have 10 G-Wagons and you have all the 10 Rolexes, you have all that? It's not possible. There must be something you're doing that is wrong. It's either you're doing drugs or you're doing Yahoo. You cannot say you legitimately have this nightclub and it's just from drinks you're able to live the life you're living. You see someone that's living a life, he's driving all the fancy cars, and you ask, what does he do? Nobody even asks what he does. You ask young ladies, I see those kids, they say, I want my boyfriend to be a Yahoo boy, because a Yahoo man looks after his girlfriend, he buys me wigs, he buys me expensive hair, he buys me iPhone 16, that's what I want. So the fact that our values are moving away from that is what is scary. So it is indeed, there's a social component to it, and we need to consciously reorient ourselves as a people and recognize it as a problem and walk backwards to address it, because the level with which we go in this regard is, is just beyond shameless. One day he has nothing, the next day he's wealthy, and we're all celebrating without asking, hang on, where did that come from? So I think it's an important thing. And when you spoke to the issue about having VIPs, going ahead of the line, treating others, I think these are things that we need to remind people in political leadership. These are things that the government should issue circulars on. I raise it, I speak to it. In the course of my work, I do performance assessment of ministers, and naturally, I'm not someone that likes to sit in VIP lounge. I like people watching, so I always sit in the general lounge, and I'm a frequent traveler. So when I'm at the airport and I'm unable to board because we have just 2 security baggage scanners and walk-ins that are functional, and then you have like 100 people trying to get on the first flight, and everybody's queuing up. And then I call the MD of FAN, Madam, we're here. Why do you have just 2 security baggage scanners? Why is one not functioning? What is the problem? And he said, oh, which part of the terminal are you? I'm here, I'm boarding Eric on this terminal. And she messaged me, oh, I'll send someone to take you to the protocol lounge so you can board. I was like, no, I actually know the protocol lounge. I know where it is, but I choose not to use the protocol lounge because I want to experience what everyone is experiencing. And beyond even people going ahead of the line, people in public, senior public officers are insulated. So it's a deliberate effort by the system to insulate them. So the protocol lounge that is for the ministers and whatever, there's this, so when everybody finishes boarding, they go and pick them up and take them. So they're insulated, that way they are not conscious of what the day-to-day process is for someone to board a plane. And I think these are the things that we need to move away from. There's only for government to have a protocol lounge. If the airline you're flying business class and has a lounge for you, that is your problem. But as a government, do not insulate your officials. So for a government, someone to revert back to me when I say I'm unable to board, oh, please go to the VIP area and you board. No, I've been, just to say that I was chief of staff, in the last, from 2015, I had access to the lounge, but I don't use it because I'm a people watcher naturally, I'm curious, but also in this my job, I want to be where I can do a daily assessment. And I always tell my team that whatever you do, you are in Nigeria and you go to the same market, you experience everything. So on a day-to-day, you are doing an assessment. My electricity, I'm doing an assessment. Every part of my life is an assessment of what the government is doing. When you go to the hospital and you're waiting, it's an assessment. I remember I put an indicator for the Ministry of Health that the waiting time to see the doctor in public hospitals. And they pushed that, oh, this is basic, that's what's done everywhere. So if you have that, then you'll be able to walk back on other indicators and have the private healthcare service providers to do the same. So insulating VIP or public officials is wrong, and and I think government needs to do that in itself, and the whole value reorientation of even you being that change you are. So the more government officials that decide not to do it, the more others will be able to join. And one of the curious things that I mentioned is that every time I fly, I don't see them. Interesting. You fly all the time, you never see everyone in the airport, so where are they flying? I think I spoke to the EFCC chairman about that. So which plane are they using to travel? There must be somewhere else, some other lounge that we're not. And that lounge, how are they able to afford that? That's another question that we need to ask ourselves. Thank you, sorry.
Professor, let me go. Okay.
Yeah. I think she's done a lot of conversation to the social question. But what I would just add is what is emerging in our research, both the research we've done and the work Chatham House is doing, is the fact that we need to include behavioral change component into our anti-corruption intervention. We have to be very intentional about that aspect. Two, we cannot ignore youth as change makers, and we need to create more space for them. And we need to think about it like this. I mean, this generation of leaders will eventually fade away. So we need to also begin to plan ahead, 10, 20 years ahead. I think that's how a country, gradually goes, and begin to engrave those social norms we want to see in the next 10, 20 years. And I know that there are a lot of people already doing that. So frustrated young adults or adults in general, or young people who really want to make that change can begin to kind of say, how do we do this? Which speaks to what Dr. Aziza is saying. Let's begin to have that collective, approach to say, how do we forget about what is happening now. Begin to project what you want to see in the future, and then begin to create plans towards that. Let me also give a few comments on the safety, how safe we're using digital. I think there was a question on that. One thing is technology is always evolving, and it's adaptive technology is what we should be thinking about. Yes, it has its dangers, like any man-made thing. It always has positive and negative, but perhaps what will really help citizens, feel safe is one, the whistleblower bill that we've been talking for quite a while. The reporting mechanisms, and like eye reporting, like what the eagle eye that are already emerging. So you would expect that you will always have some form of challenges, but also balance it with the action you need to take when you have those challenges. And I think that can then begin to help, create that safety. Then maybe the ICPC, EFCC, and all of the other agencies can do more to protect youth who use those platforms. Because they're very good at, they're so smart with technology that they will always come up with another way to address even the problem. I just wanted to,
Thank you. It's very depressing each time we listen to this kind of conversation. First, because I think the discussion merely scratched the surface and not the depth of the problem, not the root. And it's quite very depressing. We should be very careful the way we use state capture. Let's not overgeneralize it. A good example of state capture is the award of the contract of is it coastline or whatever you call it. That's a very good example of state capture. But there are a lot of issues about state ineffectiveness and irresponsibility that might seem like state capture in Nigeria. I think the ineffectiveness is very serious. And having grown at my own age, I'm very old now, I can compare when I went to the university in Nigeria and the kind of education I supervised as a lecturer. And these are the source, the quality of governance that are diminished over the decades. It's the explanation for all we are seeing. I mean, James, you will know in the 70s when you were in ABU, you knew what it meant to behave properly. But because there is a diminution of governance, we also borrow policies that are not contextually understood. Somehow, in the 70s, you went to a university in Nigeria, you knew you were prepared to be a leader, not a rogue. Suddenly somebody said we should not be building hostels for students because in America they don't. And you find from 1977 until, I don't know if it's comment, I think the Abacha was the one who was trying to change that policy. No new hostels were being built by government. And it turned out to be a lie. I went to the US, I happened to be at Philadelphia. University of Pennsylvania had hostels, large ones. And so we see lies that government officials project as policy. And the effect is one of the reasons driving corruption. So when we talk about norms change, what would be the norm? Again, we have chapter 2 in our constitution, and I will end with that in response. If you read chapter 2 of our constitution, I'm not going to go back to the history. That is Nigeria's norm. That's Nigeria's norm of governance. Take the economic component, for example. Every government since 1999 has violated those chapter 2 provisions with impunity. With serious impunity, recklessly with the advisors. People say it is unjustified. It's a lie. Look at the preamble, and lawyers also deceive us. Look at the preamble to the first statement in chapter 2. It says it shall be the duty. A duty is not voluntary. It shall be the duty of all organs, all government officials, to obey the following. Non-justiciable means I can't claim the right as individual, but it doesn't mean that government is absorbed from doing. So ideally, budget should be that you take it to legislature, you say how does it comply with chapter 2? If it doesn't, and the governor refuses to do that, it's an impeachable offense because it's a duty. Dereliction of duty is an impeachable offense. If it is the president, it's an impeachable offense. We need to go back and look at chapter 2 as our norm, as our value, and begin to create institutions that are strong enough to be able to bring us to that. Unfortunately, the legislature should have been that institution, but we know it's one of the very corrupt institutions in Nigeria. So where are we? My last reflection is just a statement. Political scientists here will remember Claude case says, that the problem with Nigeria is the people who are duty bound to solve the problems are the cause and beneficiaries of the problems. So that means we are in a bind. The second question, the second issue that I need to raise is a question I was asked in a conference in London. And somebody asked me, what have been the templates used politically and economically by Asian tigers that we often refer to? And they borrowed American liberal free market or their orders. What I take away from that is you need a leader that is visionary. The tools he used may not be purely liberal democratic freedom, liberal democratic free market. It will need to have a vision that is contextual for his country, that is culturally relevant. We've had very strong leaders, but they lack vision. And I think we need to go back. In 1999, the legal regime allowed, I'm not saying it cannot be abused, allowed INEC and security intelligence agency to screen politicians and screen out those with terrible behaviors. Politicians got into the parliament and they changed all those requirements. These are the kind of template that I think we should be doing. We should demand, we don't need new demand. Let's go back and demand a government that must hold itself accountable for Chapter 2. And if we can do that, I think we'll begin to start our norm and value reorientation. Thank you.
Okay, Ode, a very final word, and then we have to close the session. Yeah.
Before the final word.
No, your final word.
All right. So just put me on the spot. But again, one of my favorite conversations has always happened. Sorry, Dr. Pele, I have to mention you. When we have conversations, one of the learnings for me is who is a good person in 2025. I mean, if I ask 3 people, 5 people in this room, you rack your brains, but like Prof said, maybe in 1970 when I was not born, or 1960, who would be a good person at that time? I think at the points like we've all discussed, for me, it is clear that there is no clear line between politics and governance in this regime or in the future, and we need to begin to create those clear lines between politics and governance. And civil society organizations should be supported to doing this. I've also looked at the time phrase for how old the U.S. government is. Dr. Obi also mentioned Georgia and how they've transited from where they were before to date. Nigeria is a progress report. We need to keep pushing, and we'll keep pushing to make accountability the norm and not the exception. Thank you very much.
Okay, so there we have it, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We've been told there's no more time for this session. I know there are questions online, and there are also more questions in the hall, but it's not the end of the conference. So I'm sure we're going to get our opportunity to ask the questions. There are people at the back of the hall that I would really desperately have loved to give an opportunity to speak, but I won't be able to do so. So on behalf of all the panelists, let me thank you very much for this opportunity, and we hope the conversation continues. We have a 15-minute break now, only 15 minutes, and then we'll be back for the second panel. Thank you very much.
Now, I'm conscious that we have an attendance on Zoom, so I have that on my laptop. And I want to encourage those of us who are joining online to please, as the conversation is going on, you can use the Q&A box to drop your questions so that once it's time, we can get to them. There'll be a few sets of rules of engagement for Q&A, so please just keep that in mind. All right. I think the last 2 things I have to do is to remind us that we are not observing Chatham House rules on this particular discussion, even though we're here on the invitation of Chatham House, right? So everything you say is on the record. Also, at some point, you can access the Mentimeter platform. I think there's a QR code somewhere on one of your packs. If you simply scan the code, you can engage with the conference topics so far. All right, so we'll get straight into it. I'm conscious that with the panel earlier, a lot of you, everybody here probably has quite a bit to say. And I know that some of the things that were said already kind of lead into points that will be made in this conversation, but I will ask that we keep to the 5 minutes, right? And we'll lead with, on the agenda pack, there's already sort of a sense of some of the things that each of you will be discussing. So Dr. Hoffman, I'll start with you, right? You just published this report. Was published yesterday, if any of you have it. It's a 50-page report, if I'm not wrong. And it answers some of the things that were raised in the earlier panel. So perhaps you want to summarize key points for us and how they address some of the things that were looked at. Mind you, previous panel was taking stock. So what we're trying to do is look ahead. What's the next 25 years going to look like? 50 years going to look like? And so you've got the floor.
Thank you so very much, Nabila, for that wonderful introduction. And it really is a pleasure to be part of this very rich discussion today. And I know that the time that I have, I will not be able to summarize the entire report. It's 50 pages long. I would encourage you to read it. I know the publications team and everybody on SNAG got frustrated with me from time to time, the number of times I wanted to update the report, so it speaks to the current moment. So 25 years of anti-corruption in Nigeria. Us and SNAG, we have been doing the work that we've been doing, looking at social norms and the ways in which behavioral features sustain corrupt practices in Nigeria. So for those 10 years, there are a number of perspectives that informed, the work that is reflected in our report. So one of the perspectives that informed, the direction, the looking forward direction of this report is the fact that we found that across different types of corruption behavior, so we did work around petty bribery, we talked about that today, we did work around embezzlement and fraud, consistently across different types of corrupt behavior, what we found is that corruption avoidance in contexts such as Nigeria is simply too costly, too risky, too cumbersome. They're procedural, it's almost as though in many sectors, the default mode, what is rewarded, what is incentivized across various sectors, and we also did this on procurement, is exploiting corrupt loopholes. So corruption avoidance, corruption resistance, whichever way in which you want to describe it, is simply too costly. And the second thing that we found out in the past years of SNAG is that corruption networks, and we talked about the network dimensions of corruption today, is that corruption networks or corruption systems, whether at the ground level, maybe more organized at the ground level than at a petty level, are highly coordinated. There's a lot of coordinating features, and norms play a huge role in coordinating the unwritten dimensions of corruption, the ways in which various actors respond to opportunities. So that architecture, the interests that inform them, is very, very networked. Corrupt actors are not stupid, of course. They exploit institutions, they compromise them, they take them captive, and the like. So corruption is highly coordinated. So the correlation you would make with that is that corruption avoidance or corruption resistance and anti-corruption needs to be also highly coordinated. But the question then comes that how do you coordinate around corruption resistance and avoidance in a context where corruption is almost the norm? Everybody seems to be doing it. So that is why we came in this work to look at what are the motivations of people, who are the exceptions to the rule. So even with corrupt rules or corruption rules, there are always exceptions to every rule. So we spent the last 2 years speaking to anti-corruption, norm entrepreneurs, violators. There are various terms in social norms literature that describes these kinds of people. We kind of debated, going back and forth, should we call them integrity champions, what way should we describe them? Reformers is one that we use in the report. But the general gist of those who resist corruption is that they have certain features. They have certain characteristics, personal intrinsic characteristics as they call them. There's certain methodology that they employ in different situations where corruption arises and they wish to avoid them. I can't speak to all of those dimensions right now, but it's all in the report. And that was kind of like the micro dimension, or the micro level of looking at corruption resistance in Nigeria. We looked at also the macro, so trying to understand what are the communal, common, collective integrity values in Nigeria. So we did a survey for that. So we had interviews, and before I just talk about the survey data, a lot of the anti-corruption reformers, resistors, avoiders that we spoke to, many of them are here in this room. So it underscores the point that not everybody, as much as, you know, the morning has been a bit depressing, to be honest, but not everybody is engaging in corruption. We have people who resist corruption in our own lives, our parents, role models. That's why we went with role models, because norms of integrity and transparency, when you have a corrupted system, need to be modeled. And because you have a corrupted system and corruption is highly coordinated, you need individuals who are credible, who are motivated, who have an interest in avoiding corruption to seed new norms. And that's the terminology that I use in the report, because you need that signaling factor. Of course, signaling is more powerful when it is most visible. But given our political context in Nigeria and all of the institutional dimensions that we've spoken to already today, that kind of big bang signaling is quite rare and quite, I don't know, not very promising, I would say. It's not very promising. So therefore you need actors who can signal to various networks strategically so that they cause what is called in the literature a tipping point, where enough people are doing the right thing that it becomes the norm. You denormalize corruption. So that's kind of the thrust and the direction of the report. Can I say one more thing?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, one more thing to just kind of underscore that. Institutions are not self-enforcing. Neither are reforms self-implementing. Human agency matters, so it's really, really important to look at the human agency thing. So just before I finish, I'd like to just flag the findings from the collective integrity survey that we did. And you'll find this on page 21, where we asked Nigerians across the country, about 6,000 household surveys that we did, a battery of questions. So for testing, you know, what is the level, what is the status, what is the temperature of our collective integrity? And what I find very promising from that survey is that we are, as a country, at a critical juncture. 4 of those questions were self-interested, and 4 of them were communal, collective interested. And what was the highest of the response of that was when we asked people in my community feel bad for someone who is being taken advantage of. We strongly agree with this as a communal value. And there are 2 others, you know, of that collective integrity, collective communal value measure. So I think that is really, as much as, you know, most people understand that in Nigerian society, honesty is downgraded over taking advantage of opportunities and the like. But for the most part, the headline for us for that survey is that as a community, as a society, we have strong values around fairness, around civic duty. Those things are still resilient despite the corrupting effect of the system. So the software isn't completely corrupted. Right. The software isn't completely taken over. So if you were to intervene in this environment, you need to put in place penalties that are socially meaningful. You need to celebrate the behavior that you want and disincentivize the behavior that you don't want. And we don't have that consequence management framework. And I know that Mr. Rukera is going to speak to that. So I'll end on that point.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. We will circle back, right, and you get the chance to expand a bit more on some of the points of your research. I want to come to Ms. Adamolekwa at this point to get your initial thoughts on addressing barriers for collective citizen engagement, but I'd like to put a slight caveat to it, right, or an addition. So again, because this panel is looking ahead, I'm conscious that over the next 25 years, you're talking about 25 generations, if you like, in each individual year. So what would addressing the barriers in the context of these generations look like, considering that we don't know, right now we're talking generative AI, we don't know what it will be in 25 years, what are the barriers that we would need to remove?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the conversation, and thank you, Chatham House, for having me. I mean, generations are usually said to be 25 years. So rather than in that year sense, I'll look at it as a block. I mean, we've talked about a lot of the issues, but I'll start with framing them and then framing how to overcome them. So one is just the unending assault on Nigerian citizens. So mine is talking about the challenges, overcoming the barriers to collective citizen engagement. 3 keywords: collective, citizens, and engagement. So number one, what we call in Nigeria parlance, one day, one drama. Number 2, impunity, nothing happens. And it was interesting that Adiza talked about the Public Procurement Act, and everybody also referenced the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Road, because that is a beautiful example of the PPA being violated in like the best possible way. And so what that does in terms of signaling from government. Number 3, we also have an administration that does not like dissent. So people's fear for their well-being, being picked up, being arrested, being locked up, being harassed is a real fear around collective citizen engagement. Number 4, for a lot of people, democracy equals elections. There's nothing in the framing for Nigerians that teaches around why a democracy is different from a monarchy, a dictatorship, military rule, in the sense that with a democracy, citizens have voice. And that's what Mrs. Ezekwesili talks a lot about, the demand and supply. So the demand side of the democracy that tells citizens they have voice, they have agency, and they can use it. And then lastly, cultural norms. And so the data that was presented in the first panel was a bit interesting. One said 70% of Nigerians would not give a bribe. Another one said 50%, if I'm not mistaken, if given the opportunity to cheat, would do so. So I think the data contradicts in terms of where people are, in terms of what they would do, but it also takes us back to the current conversation around polling, where people tell you the answer they think you want to hear, not necessarily what they would do. So I think it's something interesting, because in our daily lives, people expect to be either paid for something, engaged in some way, tipped to do their jobs, or incentivized to do their jobs. And as we've said on and on, it's the easier thing that's incentivized, which is corruption that's incentivized. And then lastly, and tied to that as well, is that if we pay attention to the way government is designed, it's not just the fact that it's harder in terms of processes. My brother is an architect, and he also said even in the way our buildings are designed, they are designed not to be user-friendly. They are designed for you to need someone to help you navigate getting something done. And that also, I mean, why am I trying to figure out how to get a passport? I pay someone and they sort out the problem. And the interesting thing about that is if the government actually collected the money. So if getting a passport, a slight diversion, getting a passport is 10,000 naira, but I can get it in 24 hours with what I would have paid someone who's an immigration staff, pay them 100,000 to get it. There's a level of Nigerians that will pay, and the money will go into government coffers. But because government designs it outside of that process, it's individuals that get that money, and the process is what it is. Anyway, so if I frame it around those 5 points, how then do we overcome that to get collective citizen engagement? Dr. Otibe talks a lot about social movements, and it's just really around this idea that we come around a common idea of what we are trying to move towards. So it's not institutional NGO-esqueness, but just citizens understanding that they have rights and they have responsibilities. And that takes time, and that takes education, and that's a process. It's not a quick fix. So one, for all of us that play in this space, we must be intentional that this is a long haul. We must recognize that until people understand, I wear my shirt with pride, until people understand that as a citizen in the country, you have rights and responsibilities that enable you to engage, that enables you to move beyond the fact of our cultural hierarchical barriers that people who are in office, we defer to them in a certain way. And that process takes time. Number two, I think we also need to engage government, especially on the civil society side, a little bit more. There's a very delicate tension that comes in for those who are seen as anti-government and those who are seen as working with government. And because once you're engaging government, there's a dynamic around the way you engage, around the way you can speak or not speak, criticize or not criticize, that gets interesting, let me put it that way. Three, we also are very much in a low trust environment, and we need to be intentional about building trust, about transparency. So in Nigeria at the moment, government is constantly, like every 2 years, they wake up and they want to regulate civil society or non-profit organizations, even though there are, I think, like 21 laws that we are subject to, but they're always trying to find new ones. And a part of that challenge is the fact that the civil society space is not self-regulated. So ourselves, while we talk about transparency, we haven't taken that upon ourselves to be as transparent as we need to be. So I think that issue also means that we're fragmented in a way that prevents us working together in a much better way around the common goal. And then lastly, I will go to Professor Lemika's point in the fact that he was telling Mrs. Ezekwesili that it's good that she's still angry. Meanwhile, he expects the outcomes that we have. And so if the players, i.e. the supply side of governance, are going to react in certain ways and do certain things, then as a collective and as citizens, we only have two responses. One is to be intentional about the type of people that run for public office and how we support those people. And for those who are in government, how we encourage them and support them. I was telling Aziza that I was very glad to see her here. She's in government, but she was speaking very honestly about even some of her perspectives about things that she doesn't agree with. So people like that should not be crucified in a sense for being in government, but should be supported and encouraged. And then the other side is the citizen side of it, which is we don't need large numbers, but we need loud numbers. We don't need one angry obviously. We need, in this room, if we can get maybe 3, 4, I consider myself a loud one, but if we can get 3 or 4 other loud ones, it's in that consistency about bringing the issues forward and then organizing around that and consistently pushing forward is, at my view, the only way to combat that.
Thank you, Ms. Damalekun. You highlight the staying power of civic engagement. At this point, right, let's cross to the other side of the aisle. Dr. Bello, I'd like you to speak to us on your initial thoughts, right, around what the priorities are for Nigeria's anti-corruption agencies.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. First, let me introduce Code of Conduct Bureau, because obviously it seems that not everybody knows about the Bureau and their activities. we are enshrined in the Constitution. Our responsibility is for us to ensure highest standard of ethics in public service. Our values are honesty, accountability, and transparency in public service. So most of the things that have been said here, if we look at the functions and responsibility of code of conduct, and if we are doing it effectively, then most of these things would have been solved. But I'm trying to talk about the priorities now that we have. First thing that we need to discuss is about strengthening these institutions, these anti-corruption agencies. How do you make sure that they're independent, they are well-resourced, and they have the capacity to deliver their work? One of the key things that is hampering the effort of anti-corruption agencies is funding. You need funds to do all the activities that you say you are going to do. But let me say at this point that this present government is doing a lot to fund these organizations. All the anti-corruption agencies, the government has increased substantially their monetary allocation. For example, CCB used to have, I'm not going to say the amount, you can see it online. Let me even say it. Our budget was 3 billion before, but now our budget is more than 400 to 500% increased. And that is testament to the commitment of this government in trying to make sure that we are doing our work. But apart from budgetary allocation, we are also looking at other sources of funding. For example, recoveries. The more we recover, how can we use that funds to make sure that we use it for activities? But then, it's not enough for you to have the funds, you need to have the capacity to be able to do that. For example, CCB, one of the major issues that we have at CCB is that we don't have enough staff for us to do our job. We have offices in 36 states of the Federation, and then just imagine, we have around 4.5 to 5 million public servants. And what are you supposed to do? We need to collect the asset declaration, for example, one of our co-mandates. We need to verify those asset declarations. It means we have to go physically and verify these assets. And then we also need to verify the documents again to see that whether you own that or you don't own that property or assets. So you can imagine the kind of resources that we need to do that. We need to have computers all over the country. We need to have uninterrupted power supply. If you are going to do our online asset declaration, we need to have internet access. So although we have improved budgetary allocation now, we are going to use this money to make sure that at least we are achieving most part of what you have said to do. Apart from that, again, there is the issue of legal reforms. Somebody mentioned about the issue of public asset declaration here. Let me just mention it here so that everybody will know what we are all about. Code of conduct is about transparency. One of our core values is honesty, transparency, and accountability. So therefore, we are not against anything that is transparent. We also have to make sure that the privacy of individual or public servants is very well protected, especially now that we have security issues. If you declare your asset as public servant and then we allow it to the public, we have kidnappers. You all know about what is happening in Nigeria. Somebody will just look at the asset declaration and then say, this person has money, let me go and kidnap him. But there are so many insecurities. So we have to have a way of balancing the privacy of public servant on one hand, and then the transparency that the civil service organization, and even the CCB itself, is asking of. So that's the balance we are trying to achieve. And I can tell you now, we are doing consultation with stakeholders to find out how do you manage to bridge this gap. That's what I want to say about that. Then other priorities that we have as an anti-corruption agency is cooperation among the anti-corruption agencies. It's important because if you are working at cross purposes, you are not going to achieve what you need to achieve. Therefore, us in the anti-corruption agencies, we have already developed a system where we are cooperating with each other. Somebody was asking me about the achievement of CCB yesterday. I was on news, somebody was asking me about that. Many people will not be aware that EFCC and ICPC, they request for information from CCB, and then we provide those information on public servants that they are investigating. Even though I have to admit, they have to go and do so many other things, but that forms part of the basis of their successes. So that is the kind of cooperation we have with anti-corruption agencies. We give them information about corrupt public officials and then they go and investigate. But now, what we are trying to do as CCP, instead of us to just be giving information to anti-corruption agencies, why can't we do it ourselves? So right now, the focus of this administration is for us to do it ourselves. To give information to anti-corruption agencies, we'll also need to investigate those public servants themselves. People have been mentioning it, but once, for example, one of the key functions of code of conduct is if you declare assets at the beginning of the period, and then you declare assets at the end of the period, and then we compare these two declarations and see what is the increase. What is the increase between the two declarations? If the increase can be explained by our known sources of income, then we don't have any issue with you. But if the increase cannot be explained, you're a public servant, before you become into power, maybe you have one house or two houses. After leaving office, you have 10 or 30 houses. Therefore, we have to ask you to explain how you got those properties. And us in CCB, one of the advantages we have is that we don't have to prove that. If you go to FCC and ICPC, they have to prove that you have stolen money. But for us, the onus is on you. The burden of proof have shifted to you as a public servant. You are going to come and tell us, explain to us how you got that money. And if you cannot do that, then we forfeit that to federal government. And that's why the slogan that we have in CCB now is explain or forfeit. If you cannot explain the source of your income, then we forfeit it to federal government.
Right.
So just finally, the other issue that I want to talk about procurement fraud. People have mentioned about procurement fraud here, and people have talked about high-profile cases. One of the key things that is happening in Nigeria is impunity. People are doing it because they know that nothing is going to happen to them. But I'm trying to tell them that if we are doing our work properly, and we are going to be doing our work properly, then it's going to prevent people from even committing corruption in the first place. And the reason why CCB is different from other anti-corruption agencies is that we, as CCB, we are more of a preventive organization. So we are there to prevent corruption from happening in the first place. I think there are other issues, but I don't have much time to discuss it, but let me just mention them in passing so that at least you know that we have the issues. We have the issue of use of technology. We have online asset declaration now that we're trying to roll out. Apart from that, we have asset recovery, one of the major things that we are focusing on, because the punishment for CCB are three, majorly. It's either you are banned from office for up to 10 years, or you are removed from office, or your asset is forfeited. So we are focusing on asset recovery as well as some other punishment again. And apart from that, we have corruption at the subnational levels, local government states. CCB is poised to be able to do that because you have offices all over the country, and then we have the capacity to be able to do that. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bando. I think it's instructive that a large part of your response looks at what internal priorities are, getting them straight before tackling those external priorities. So in-house, you talk about funding, you talk about capacity building, independence and whatnot. Very interesting there. And we'll circle back to subnational conversations in a bit. Mr. Rugera, you got, I want to hear what your initial thoughts are, right? The boogeyman in any conversation is typically the public sector. But we know that a lot of the time when corruption is entrenched, there's a collaboration between, there's an unholy alliance, if you like, between the public and the private sector. So speak to us about linking the change, right? Such that we're not just looking at the public sector, but we are expanding it across the board to the private sector, and there's sort of a collaborative effort going forward.
Good morning all, and thank you again, Chatham House, for not just inviting me, but actually providing this extremely influential and credible platform for discussing these issues, because they're very topical and they always have been, and very important. My only misgiving this morning is that there's nothing that makes you look unintelligent as much as being allowed to speak last when other intelligent people have spoken.
This is not an indication of Mr. Rugera's intelligence base.
But thank you. And for a long time, we have focused action with respect to corruption on probably half a million people out of the 200 million in Nigeria. And those 500,000 people are typically people who go into public service. I've been a lawyer for 35 years this year, and spent about a little above 6 of that in public service. And so in my experience in those 6.5 years, it let me realize that, like everything else, when you're trying to address something, even with your best effort, if you achieve 100% on the one side, you're still not going very far for the whole problem. And I remember being a criminal defense lawyer in the United States many years ago. And the US moved from penalizing drug users to severe penalties for drug traffickers. And so it was almost a slap on the wrist for possession and use, but it was mandatory significant jail time for traffickers. And I think I read a report last year that said there hasn't been much movement in drug. For crying out loud, you have an administration that is imposing tariffs on account of fentanyl epidemic. And so what it shows is that even in a very strong law enforcement community where jail houses are everywhere and they're very full, and incredible investigative capacities, especially at the federal level, they're still struggling. And that's really because they still, I mean, what you were trying to do is manage the supply side, but when there's a demand, people would always find a way for the supply. And so that is the simplest analogy for me in addressing how we must make sure that the scrutiny and the demand for transparency and consequence for the lack of it must exist on both the private and the public side. Corruption in Nigeria, I think someone, I might have been who spoke, somebody spoke recently and said the software, the problem of the software. And I chuckled because corruption in Nigeria is no longer about the software. In the software, there's Microsoft Word, your PowerPoint, or your Excel, or Access. And I think corruption in Nigeria is about the operating system. The operating system itself, you have your entire Microsoft operating system is corrupted. And so your Word is going to be problematic, your Access is going to be problematic, everything will be problematic. And so it doesn't matter how much work you do to fix the virus in your Microsoft Word. It doesn't take you anywhere if your Microsoft Office or your Microsoft operating system is corrupted. What is even worse? What is even worse, and one of the real big problems, is that your Microsoft Word may not even be corrupted. And you might have invested so much to protect it from being corrupted. And the tools you have invested in protecting it from being corrupted are valid, and they work well. But that Microsoft Word will still be problematic if it would operate in the Windows operating system that is already corrupted. And so our best effort with managing public sector corruption will still, at best, not give us optimal results. I'm not even talking about maximum results. It won't give us optimal results. In my and the corruption, as I've seen it, breaks into about 4 categories. There is public sector within public sector corruption. That is when you have the embezzlement or the executive bribing the legislature to get an appropriation act, or when the tax authority or the Auditor General or Accountant General's office, the Auditor General says, well, without a certain mutual understanding, it will be a bad audit report. Or the Accountant General says, with respect to your release of funds, or the Budget Office. And so that's corruption, public to public corruption and embezzlement. That's 2 sets of it. Then there is the public to private, which is where your petty bribery and sometimes grand bribery also operate. So that's another. And then there is the private to private. I conducted an investigation of the company with respect to competition issues on an occasion, and amongst the internal documents that we saw as part of the investigation was an internal investigation of their own supply chain and their own procurement personnel ripping the company off in corruption. And so all of that. And so we must make sure that the scrutiny and the challenge for managing corruption goes across the board. And if we don't, it's endemic or contagious problem. Because ultimately, all the people in public service come from the same society. And I might add, the only other piece when you take in the public and the private, perhaps civil society. I'll tell you, I think civil society is perhaps one of the champions of our democracy and the standards of our lives in this country. But I'll tell you what my personal experience was in office. And it's good that I'm saying this at a place where somebody had mentioned, I think it must be her who spoke earlier on about the freedom of information request and how important that is. But there is no good tool that cannot be corrupted. And until you apply standards across the board, they will be adopted for the wrong reason. When I was in office, I remember that there was a FOI request for all my travels, everything I had ever done while I was in office. And this was by a civil society organization. And they followed it up with a letter to me, to the minister, and to the director of finance where I worked, the FCCPC, saying that they had gone and run a check at the Corporate Affairs Commission, and that the law says that you cannot be on the board of any company while you're in public service. And they listed probably 8 companies where, from the Corporate Affairs Commission's record, I'm a director. Of these 8 companies, 6 of them were Faith Foundation, other civil society organizations. 2 of them were shelf companies that I didn't even know about. I was a lawyer in practice, and so you'd have shelf companies that none had ever been in any operation. And so we're civil society, we're here for transparency and all of that, and unless you reach out to us to cut out a deal. The deal was what? Money. And so I like the point Yemi made when she says that even civil society has to regulate itself. And everybody in senior government position is a target, whether to be presented with a proposal for corruption or to be extorted from a corruption standpoint. Everybody. And the record is clear. I never demanded a bribe in the entire time I worked in government. But I cannot tell you that I wasn't propositioned, I wasn't offered a bribe.
Mr. Rikera, pardon me, forgive me, I do have to interrupt you at this point, right? I'm conscious of time, and there's nobody on the panel that actually stuck to the 5 minutes, and I consciously let that be. You did very well, Ms. Atamaleko, I would say that.
So,
but,
in closing.
All right, in closing. Go ahead and close.
So, in closing, especially on a platform where there's a lot of civil society, we're going to have to shift some of the resource to scrutiny and holding private sector and civil society responsible. And the methods are different. Private companies are very concerned about their reputation. And quite frankly, managing scrutiny and transparency in that space comes far easier than managing it in government, where sometimes reputation is not a factor. The same thing with civil society, because if there's established corruption in an organization, it affects funding and collaboration from other civil societies. And so that's the point. We can't continue to focus all the efforts on 500,000 people when it's happening amongst maybe 100 out of 250. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rikera. So in my follow-up questions, and I'm again conscious of time, so we don't have the same amount of time we did for the first set of questions. And Dr. Hoffman, I'll come to you last, right? I want to start with Ms. Adamaleko, and please, I'd like to get to the audience soon enough, so I would ask participants on the stage to keep the responses as concise as possible. Ms. Adamaleko, so I'm curious as to what sustaining citizen engagement looks like across two sets of areas. So first, rural and urban areas, right? But also across the regions, accounting for the slight differences in cultural norms or how it is the citizens actually engage with governance. So in responding to that, it's still contextualizing what the next 25, 50 years look like. So if you could give some insight into that, please.
Sure. Just wanted to piggyback on what Mr. Rukara said really quickly. Freedom of information. Another thing to note with the point about private sector, for any private sector organization that collects government money, freedom of information applies to them as well. Enough is enough actually to COSCAR's BMW distributors to court, and we won at the appeal court level because they did not want to make their books public. Now the Supreme Court, they're appealing to the Supreme Court. But anyway, just wanted to add that. Rural, urban, and across the different zones. I think we need to do less national work. I say, using EIE example, if we're doing national campaign, it's easier for the person in Taraba and the person in Enugu to talk about President Tinubu because all of us have one president. But in Taraba, and you're speaking about your senator, I live in Lagos, your senator is not my senator, really not my business. But it's then the work, and especially now that local governments are supposedly going in and out. Local governments are supposedly going to get their monies directly, or some of them are. Now that local governments are getting their monies directly, also enables sort of more, I don't want to use, not grassroots, but more community level type work, so that education is in languages that people engage in, is in formats that people can engage in. In urban areas, to your earlier point, technology can be amplified, can be used. In some areas, it's radio that would work for you. So I think just tweaking the tools for the audience that you want to engage, and also organizations not necessarily trying to be national. There is a lot of work to be done at the community level.
Thank you, Ms. Adamaleko. Dr. Bello, you started to talk about the subnationals, right?
Yes.
And the CCB has offices across the country, but I'm coming back to the influence the CCB has with anti-corruption agencies, whether federal or state level, right? And I'm curious as to your thoughts on how we align the objectives and the approach. So the federal government has a general objective for anti-corruption, depending on what administration is in office. But then you come to the state level, and their approach or their objectives are almost fundamentally different from what is at the center. So how do we align these objectives, taking into account that the subnationals still have different measurables, if you like, or deliverables? How do they align to the center?
Okay, thank you very much that you mentioned this. If you look at the public servant under the Constitution, they include both the public servant at the federal level, at the state level, and at local government level. So the CCB is not only about the federal level, because clearly from the president to the governors, to the chairman of local government, public servants at the federal level, at the state level, and also at local government, we are responsible for ensuring that they adhere to the highest ethics of morality. So therefore, our job is not solely about the federal level. And that's why I said CCB is poised to be able to act and then to make sure that corruption is rooted out in Nigeria completely. Why do I say that? Because in CCB, our job is preventive, like I mentioned earlier. And our job, I would say it's easy. Some people might say, how is it easy? It's easy because our own is based on facts. Like asset declaration that I mentioned earlier. Have you declared your asset? Yes, I have declared my asset. Have you declared your asset? No, I have not declared my asset. By not declaring your asset, you have already committed an offense. It's a fact. You don't have to go and do complex investigation to establish that. If you have an asset, and then you increase your asset as a public servant, it's also a fact. What are your non-sources of income? If you cannot explain that, then it's left for you to go and explain to the court how you got that money. Again, the onus has been shifted to public servant to do that. So that's another way we're going to do it. And then in relation to our cooperation with the EFCC and ICPC, it's also very clear. In the case of CCB, there is no double jeopardy for lawyers that are here. EFCC can investigate a case, and then CCB too can also go and investigate and prosecute the same case. Apart from that, somebody mentioned private and public sector. Whoever gives bribe, for example, you have two parties in bribery. You have the giver and then you have the taker. If the taker is a public servant, then the giver is likely a private person. So therefore, if we are doing our work properly, for example, we refer the private sector to EFCC for them and go and complete their own case with those private sector. And in the case of ICPC, I can tell you the kind of relationship that we have with them. If they are doing a case right now, we have the kind of relationship where ICPC is doing a very high-profile case, and then there are some parts that relates to CCB. So what they did was that they gave us a complete file containing all the evidence they have on that public servant, the documents, the records. So they are doing their own, they're trying to prove that that person has committed fraud, but we are trying to look at the part that concerns us. Is there abuse of office? You are a governor, former governor, you are a former senator. Have you abused your office? If you have abused your office, based on the facts that we got from ICPC, then we'll be able to charge you in CCB, and then we can get it easy. Another level of cooperation that we have with the EFCC is that, for example, right now, EFCC has seconded some of their staff to CCB. So they are trying to give us the experience they have. They are trying to provide us the technical knowledge as well as what we have. So there are a lot of collaboration and cooperation between us. And also, we do a lot of joint cases. I mentioned it in 2007. I used to be a staff of the EFCC. I joined the EFCC in 2004. In 2007, there is a joint investigation that we did. And the people were all in the same room. EFCC is on one side and CCB was on the other side. So we get the information of corrupt public servants, and then we give it to EFCC. EFCC will do the investigation and prosecute it. So therefore, there is a synergy between all these organizations. People might think that they are overlapping functions, but then there are so many synergies, and then we cooperate with each other.
Thank you, Dr. Bello. Mr. Ruka, you know, I've got the pleasure of letting I think it's page 33 of this report. You're mentioned, right? You are one of the integrity role models that was surveyed. Dr. Hoffman was quite particular to note. She said that there are a few people in the room, but she didn't name names. So I'm happy to drop a name. I'm curious about your experience coming from, you've now played on both sides of the table, right? Curious as to what your thoughts are on sustaining whatever it is, this integrity model you displayed at the FCCPC. Your successor is someone who, I mean, it's still somewhat recent, so we're still waiting to see what sustaining the model that you left in place looks like. But while we're waiting for the evidence, right, I'm curious as to your thoughts on what you left behind, right? What's applicable in the FCCPC that can then be adapted for other agencies, whether at national level or subnational?
Thank you. I think the most important thing is really just the consequence management system. I think the work I did at the FCCPC demonstrated clearly that you can hold people accountable. And holding people accountable is not enough to just say you've done something wrong. It's very important that the cost of doing wrong far outweighs the wrong or matches the wrong. And my approach is a consequence management system that at best makes you lose what you took in appropriately. Isn't worth it, because it makes the risk worth it in the sense that if I don't get caught, I win. If I get caught, at best, I lose what I've taken, so it's still worth the risk. And so what it is that you must have the courage to impose penalties that are commensurate to conduct. and penalties that are commensurate to conduct in the context of whatever the benefits you gain from inappropriate conduct, you lose that first. And then in addition to that, for even engaging in inappropriate conduct, you lose something. And then finally, for costing the government the process of holding you accountable, you reimburse the government for that. If we can sustain that from a regulatory standpoint, it will certainly, it's a self-regulatory mechanism to businesses and private sector altogether. And then on the inside, you must hold yourselves also accountable. As a matter of fact, I initiated a prosecution of an employee of the FCCPC because in investigating a company, we discovered that there were interactions between employees of the company and employees of FCCPC, including monetary discussions. And so we prosecuted the operatives of the company as joint defendants with the employee of the FCCPC for inappropriate conduct. And these things go a long way in the sense that outcomes don't even matter. The fact that there's the courage to initiate and even literally show that this exposure exists are things that if we can sustain will certainly modify behavior. Consequence is the greatest modifier of human behavior. Doesn't matter anywhere you go in the world. People will get away with whatever they can do.
Thank you, Mr. Irukara. Dr. Hoffman, you've heard the responses, right? So we're circling back to the research and what insights it has that perhaps addresses some of the things that they've raised, but also lays a foundation for engagement going forward. So here you've got the chance to actually get to that last chapter of this paper, the part of taking action against corruption.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to kind of speak to some of the recommendations and the way in which I framed the recommendations and kind of the overarching theme running through each of those recommendations is that when you have a context where corruption is more rewarding than being honest, you need to have legal reforms, policy reforms that are socially meaningful. When you have corruption that is supported by social norms, a normative architecture, your reform efforts need to be socially meaningful, and I mean that in these kinds of ways. And to the point that Mr. Irukara was making about consequences, legal reforms can signal norm changes. They can signal new expectations in the system, and that is what you introduced when you were at the FCCPP. That key actors can introduce policy changes indicating and signaling that expectations in the institution have changed, and that when people cross those boundaries, there are consequences. For example, prosecuting a colleague, somebody within, those are powerful and they are meaningful. At a grander level, one of the recommendations around legal and policy reforms is mandating and strengthening access to, asset declaration, and making that publicly available and accessible. The reason why is obvious. Nigerians should be able to monitor the wealth status of those who are in office. That is very, very important, and that is socially meaningful. So legal reforms can actually trigger normative changes. I want to also speak to the point that Yemi was making, very interesting point around trust. And I wanted to just indicate that actually in the report we did do a survey around trust in Nigeria. So the survey was done in August of 2023. Trust dynamics change, but they don't change so dramatically depending on circumstances. But we did a survey around trust in institutions and interpersonal trust. And what's very interesting about that survey is that on a spectrum from formal or political to informal, actually Nigerians have more trust in informal institutions, religious institutions, traditional institutions, and actually our interpersonal trust is actually quite strong, around about 40%. And it was very interesting that it was highest in Kano State, which is quite remarkable to find out. that in a number of states, it peaks and valleys in different ways, but actually, in terms of our the trust levels, they're quite strong. But another dimension of that survey that we found out around the point that Yemi was making about cooperation. So this is at the network level, at the citizen level, at the communal level. We did a survey, a component of the survey, asking questions about citizens, and out of 10 people in their community, how many do they think will participate in an accountability action, so holding elected official accountable. We found out that people thought that around about 4.6 people out of 10, so about 50%, would engage in that behavior. And the next question we asked was, so out of 10 people, how many people do you think would think this is holding an elected official accountable was important and worthwhile? And again, a very high level. So what we can extrapolate from that is that actually citizens do want to engage in accountability actions. They do want to hold. There is a strong desire and an untapped willingness among society, within society rather, among citizens to hold public officials, people who are duty bearers, responsible for public resources, accountable. One of the studies that I highlight in the report is a study by Harvard professor Erica Chenoweth. I'll end with this. And it's, maybe a lot of you have heard of it, it's a 3.5% rule. And they did a study of various non-violent civil resistance movements across a long period of time, different contexts from Britain to the US and everywhere. And it found that if you had visible, active citizens involved in forms of resistance at a citizen level, up to 3.5% of your population. So for Nigeria, if you take our population numbers to be real, about 7.8 million people. If you were to able to have anti-corruption campaigns, accountability actions that engage that many people in sustained acts of civil engagement, public participation, civil resistance, you can actually drive change. So if you have 50% of people wanting to hold, engage in accountability behavior, hold public officials to account, you need to begin to connect the dots. So that is why in the report we speak about network coalitions. We need multi-stakeholder coalitions across, in government, there are actors in government. We spoke with Mr. Rukere, actors in civil society, actors in informal institutions, traditional, religious. It needs that kind of broad-based action, that kind of broad-based coalition to drive change. And there are examples around the world, and I speak to those collective action examples in the report, from Ghana, from Colombia. They're mentioned in the report. It is not, an impossible endeavor. It is. We do have, those communal values, those components to bring together. It's just the assembly point. That's where you have your collective action problem, and that's why you have role models to signal that there's a change in the system, a change required, and that's how you get things done.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. All right, so it's time for questions from the floor. Very important, a few things, please. When you get up, identify yourself, name your organization, but also I can see a lot of hands in the room. So, please and please, one question per person. It would also save us time if you direct the question to a particular person as opposed to saying anybody on the panel or two people on the panel, please. So I'll be taking questions online as well. We've got a few people there. Let's start from the back of the room since the microphone's already there. There's a gentleman in green. Please, if we can adhere to the rules so I don't have to interrupt you. All right, while we wait on the microphone to be sorted very quickly, we've got questions.
Okay, so it's on.
All right, go ahead.
All right, good afternoon to the panelists. My name is Victor Emejue. I work with the Resource Center for Human Rights and civic education. My question is to the representative of the Code of Conduct Bureau. I'm particularly interested about the online asset declaration, and as well as making it open to the public. So I want to find out from the Bureau what you think. If the Bureau collaborates with the EFCC and ICPC to make use of the information on assets declared, because I know the law prescribes that these assets should be declared upon assumption of office and after every 4 years. What do you do with the information? Because there's a need for investigation to be carried out if the public do not have access to this information for whistleblowing activities. I am also thinking, is it not ideal for the CCB to work with other anti-corruption agencies to also conduct investigation on either the increase of this asset and if there is justiciability of this increase, in line with the office that such a person has occupied.
Thank you, Mr. Victor. Thank you, Mr. Victor. Apologies. We'll come to this other side of the room very quickly. There's a gentleman in glasses wearing white. He's behind you. We'll start with the back. We're going to come to the center.
Okay, my name is Uchenna Igwe, and I work with the CGID. So my question goes to the official from CBB. I heard when you talked about physical... Sorry?
He's the chairman of the Code of Conduct Bureau.
Okay, sorry. To the chairman of the Code of Conduct Bureau. I heard when you mentioned that the Bureau always undertakes physical verifications. So I'm wondering, of assets, after they are declared, so I'm wondering why that is being done when we have, for instance, let's take a look at the assets. We have lands, houses, accounts, and other assets. When we can easily go to the land registry and get records. So is it not more cost effective to actually invest in probably seeking this information? We have BVN with which you can verify assets that people hold in banks and all of that. So why do you need to physically visit this place?
Thank you, Mr. Chenna. We'll take a couple more questions in the room before I come to the panel. Let's come to the center of the room. The gentleman in, I think it's maroon.
Thank you very much. Sadiq Isarada is my name, from Bayero University, Kano. Since we are saying renewing Nigeria's anti-corruption agenda, I think from what I've had in the morning to now, we are focusing on other things, ignoring 3.5 issues. I think we should pay attention to professional bodies in Nigeria. By professional bodies, I mean accountants, auditors, architects, engineers, lawyers. They are very crucial in worsening corruption and in fighting corruption. Number 2, we should be very concerned about safe havens. Quite a lot is going outside the country, especially Western Europe. Once it gets there, getting it back becomes a big problem. We can't say that nothing will go out, but we should block it as much as possible. But if it goes out, other countries should help Nigeria by getting it back quickly. Finally, there should be a common forum for asset recovery for Africa. Because once we can speak as a continent in terms of recovery, I think we are likely to achieve much better. Finally, we should pay attention to what happens at state governments, not only local governments. You see, local government and state governments control close to 48% of monthly allocations. So our fight is always federal government, president. There is too much over-presidentialization.
All right.
We should pay attention to what happens in the states and local governments.
Thank you, Mr. Siddiq. All right. Because of time, I'm conscious that I can't come back to the room. We've had 3 gentlemen, let's have 2 ladies. I can see 2 female hands up. There's a lady in black here. And then the lady at the back, please prepare.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Ijoma Igwe from Partners West Africa, Nigeria. My question is to you. I'm happy you talked about the tools to get citizen engagement and all of that. But the angle I'm coming from is sustaining citizen engagement, because the issues and the dynamics that can put more barriers for citizens to engage keeps coming up. So how do you think we can sustain citizens from engaging irrespective of whatever the barriers they face? Thank you.
Thank you. Final question in the room.
Thanks so much. So my question is...
Your name, please?
Yeah, my name is Lily. My name is Lily.
From
EY. And my question is to Mr. Babatunde. And this is, I know we talk about that there's so much expectation on the government and also on the citizens as well. But how do we know where the gaps are when it comes to corruption, and to also understand how to partner better with private sector to bridge the gap?
All right, thank you, Ms. Lily. All right, there are 2 questions online. We'll come to them after we've been able to get through these particular questions. We don't have much time, I'm conscious of it. Dr. Bello, I'll start with you, because there are a couple of questions to you. Just very quickly, what you do with the information you get at the point of declaration and at the point of them leaving office, but also questions around the efficiency of physical confirmations of assets.
Okay, let me mention about the verification. There are 2 things we want to establish. First, we want to establish ownership, and then we want to establish existence. So for ownership, that's when you go to the land registries, find out whether somebody actually owns that property. So it's not enough for you just to say because you own it, then we've already verified it. For example, you can tell us if you have an asset, you can show us the agreement, you can show us the purchase, maybe you can show us even bank transfers, any proof of ownership. But that is different from physical verification, because we need to know that whether the asset already exists. And that's why we need to go and verify it. So I hope it's clear. The need for verification, physical verification, is to confirm the existence of the asset. And then the need for us to go and look for other documents is to confirm the ownership of that asset. So that's why we need to do physical verification. But then definitely there are so many other ways you can do it. You can do, for example, Google Maps and so many other things. But then that's essentially why we need to do physical verification. Then the question about online asset declaration. We are right now doing a test. We have already uploaded a lot of IOMDS, and we are doing online asset declaration. And then, like you mentioned earlier on, we are already cooperating with the EFCC and ICPC, and we are already giving them all the information they require based on their laws. So that one is we are already doing it. But the only question that you mentioned about public access, I mentioned it earlier, we are doing consultation, because there are people that want complete declaration, public declaration. And then there are some people that are saying, no, you cannot have that, because we have the Nigeria Data Protection Act, which specifically says that we cannot disclose private information of individuals. So therefore, we need to marry those 2 contending sides. And what we are doing right now, we are trying to find out how can we do that, and that's why we are doing consultation. Because, because again, it says that National Assembly has to provide guidance for us to do that. We also need to have that information so that we go and convince the National Assembly to produce a guideline that will serve the issue of transparency as well as serve the interests of privacy.
Thank you, Dr. Bello. Ms. Adamonekon, I'll come to you. The question that was asked about how to sustain citizen engagement in light of the challenges that they face, but I want to tap on this question from our Zoom participants. And the question is on how Nigerians in diaspora can contribute to sustaining anti-corruption practices, rather the fight against corruption practices in the country. This is from Lolaomi.
All right, thank you. I actually think Mr. Eruka is a good person to answer that one. But for sustainability, I mean, I mentioned local languages, local level work. So it's it's relative to issues. So when I made the comment around, for example, a senatorial district in Taraba, wasn't meant to be flippant, but their issues are not necessarily the same issues I would have in Lagos. So that's then. And then ownership. So as we go through the thread of educating citizens on what it means to be a citizen in a country, and I didn't make the point earlier, there are Nigerians that don't feel like citizens in Nigeria, because Nigeria is, in their view, has been unfair to them. And they don't get treated, quote unquote, the same way other citizens get treated. So we do have to have at some point, part of that is having that conversation around what citizenship means. So education and then storytelling. I think we don't do as good a job in telling the stories of successes. So as much as there is one day, one drama, there are also incredible and significant success stories of citizens who engage and get results. And we need to amplify that a lot more. So citizens do understand that it's not just talk, but there are things that happen when they engage, and engage as citizens. But I think really underlying that is ownership, so citizens can self-organize. So they don't need an NGO or a structured organization coming, swooping in to help, but you self-organize from a point of knowledge, from a point of understanding that you can, understanding the systems, understanding the structure of governance, who are the duty bearers, who's responsible for what. And one institution that I did mention that I think has significant value as well in this conversation are religious institutions. I'm a Christian, so I'll use the church. I will hear my pastor speak in a month more than I will probably hear my president, my senator, my House of Rep member, my state House of Assembly member, my local government chairman, and my local government council members speak in a year. And so those platforms need to be leveraged so that those who sit in them day in, day out, not only get told about wonderful stories about God and heaven, but also understand what their duty is on earth while they're still here.
Thank you, Ms. Adamulekon. Mr. Rikara, so we've only got a couple more minutes. Ms. Lily's question about identifying gaps that allow for corruption, but I want to tack on this question from Stephen Tosh on Zoom. He's asking how government and NDAs can better engage all staff in the identification and mitigation of corruption within their own operations.
Thank you very much for the questions. With respect to the gaps, I think the reason why it might seem difficult is that it's not a focus. So take for instance, if you're monitoring corruption, you're monitoring where the flare points are. If you're monitoring just the news with respect to companies having challenges with their taxes or negotiating their taxes with the government, or a company that has been reaching out for something, a telecommunications company, we can start. We can start. The thing about monitoring corruption in private sector is that the naming and shaming of one or the other would modify the behavior of hundreds. And so we don't need a huge compendium of which company is doing what. It's just the reality of the existence of an apparatus that is monitoring and calling it out. I think that would be an initial starting point, and that would certainly bridge the gap. So if we read in the news that one of the things we used to do at the FCCPC is when we open an investigation, we put it out there. And so once you know that a company is subject to investigation, you monitor that space. And so you want to know how it resolves, you want to know what happened, what's going on, if it's resolved, how, and what's the consequence. And so just the fact that those questions are called will modify behavior. With respect to the question of how intragovernmental can work, I think to a large extent, and I wish Hadiza was still here, with the way our government runs, I think you need someone at that delivery unit level or the presidency level who has that role, because that's the only way to make sure that things are working well. Because the departments of government sometimes are in different ministries and all kinds of things. If someone is focused on something like corruption, that person has oversight and visibility to everything everybody is doing. And so, for instance, you right? Like when we did some investigation, we would execute a done rate, and we would take what, maybe 100, 200,000 emails or documents, and we would see that we might not even find anything from a competition standpoint. We might find something that's been built around some internal conversations about avoiding taxes. And so you might ship that on to an FIRS that doesn't have the apparatus for receiving that type of vertical intelligence. And so having someone at the top who's looking out for that and coordinating it would be one of the quickest ways of making sure that intra-agency collaboration occurs. And with respect to the diaspora, I think most people in the diaspora are very frustrated with what they think is a system in Nigeria. And if you're active on social media or bilateral communications, you get to hear a lot of that. And so what I think we can do with the diaspora is find a way for them to centrally contribute to that conversation, for them to participate in a more, and I think that's why the question when I've come to you, in a more structured advocacy. And that would actually also be a place for even starting to speak with the Diaspora Commission. That's a very big thing. So you have a structured approach to a platform where the diasporans can contribute to the discussion. Their voices will be louder than those many people at home because they're far more vociferous and they understand the issue. They live in environments where those issues are so much bigger, and so they're able to speak to it much more. I mean, many people at home are always, you know what, my thief is better than your own thief. But the average diaspora will be all thieves are bad. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just add to that really quickly? Two quick things that just occurred to me as you were speaking. One is...
Ms. Adamoleko, I must essentially just 60 seconds because Dr. Hoffman is now asked for another 60 seconds.
Okay. So quickly, Fixed Politics is pushing the diaspora voting bill. So that's one way. If I'm working through the process to ensure that people in the diaspora can vote. And number two, participate in conversations where you're from, even if it's donating money to organizations that are educating, so they can educate people in your home community on how to engage appropriately.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Nabila. And I wanted to just pick up on the point that Ms. Ademoleko was making about storytelling. And it is really important to underscore the point of making visible the behavior that we would like to reward in society, to challenge the conventional wisdom that everybody is doing it. Like I said, we spoke with a retired Supreme Court judge. We spoke to people like Mr. Rukere, and a number of them due process people in the room, blog bank specialists in the room. So just to kind of practice what we preach, could I just ask us to put our hands together for norm resistors, norm avoiders, that if you were anonymous in the report, you can stand up. Mr. Babayola, you said that you didn't mind being known. He's one of, please stand up. He's one of the people that we spoke with. So these are people who demonstrated the kind of behavior we like in society, resisting corruption opportunities. So thank you so very much. That was all.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. A round of applause for my panel, Ms. Okoyemi Adamoleko, Dr. Abdullahi Usman Bello, Mr. Babachide Rukera, and Dr. Nina Koenig-Hoffman. I am ceding the floor at this point. My name is Nabila Usman. It's been a pleasure to chair the session.
Just in these closing remarks, I wanted to start by saying a big thank you to all of our speakers and moderators today, and thank you to all of our participants as well, both in the room with us here and our global audience joining us online. As our director, Bronwyn Maddox, said in her opening remarks, this conference marks the culmination of a decade of work for us here at Chatham House. And even with a decade of research behind us, it may still seem that we have more questions than answers about how to address corruption in Nigeria. But in the spirit of the research paper we're launching today, in closing, I just want to highlight a few of the genuine positives that have emerged over the course of this project. The first is that when the project began in 2015, social norms and behavioral change approaches to corruption in Nigeria were really quite novel, quite new. But we have seen the growth of a thriving behavioral change community here in Nigeria over the last decade, working on a wide range of issues, including corruption. Chatham House is proud to now be one organization among many. And for that, we also owe our sincere gratitude to the MacArthur Foundation for their support, and our huge thanks to our fellow behavioral change grantee cohort here in Nigeria for doing the amazing work that they do. The second positive is that our project has shown time and time again that Nigerians have a strong moral distaste for corruption. We've surveyed over the course of the project over 22,000 households, over 200 survey questions in that time, and consistently in every survey, around 90% of Nigerians said that these behaviors are wrong. And just to come back to some of the points we heard in the second session there, when we run these surveys, we don't mention corruption directly. We're referring to certain behaviors in these scenarios. So really, there's not a corruption bias inherent in the survey in that respect. So by extension, we know that part of the issue is a lack of true trust and awareness of the beliefs and attitudes of others towards corruption. And events like today, the research of this project, are one step towards changing that. And I think that's a message that's resonated looking at the online engagement platform, the Mentimeter for today. One of the strongest messages is talking about celebrating the wins that we have. And we've heard that in some of the sessions, the experience of Nigeria's maritime sector, and other examples of really being able to celebrate those wins. I just want to appreciate again all of our project survey partners for the incredible work that they've done over the course of this project on data gathering, often under challenging circumstances, and also to the National Bureau of Statistics for their partnership. Those of you who have agenda documents in front of you, if you turn over to the back cover, you will see the full group of our project partners, our SNAG family over the last decade. And we're really glad that we also have a member of each survey team represented here with us today, so thank you for joining us. Thirdly and finally, although we started this project exploring the reasons why people might choose to participate in corruption, I do think it's fitting that we're finishing with another excellent paper by our very own Dr. Lena Hoffman. This time highlights the role of these individuals, as Lena mentioned in the last session, that choose to reject corruption. And I've also been inspired over the course of the research process and several trips to Nigeria by hearing those accounts firsthand. And I would also like to express our gratitude to Accountability Lab Nigeria for their partnership in the early stages of this research. In closing, I just want to mention two important figures on this project who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today. The first is Dr. Raj Patel, our social norms advisor from the University of Pennsylvania, who has been an integral part of this project since the beginning. Unfortunately, could not travel to be here with us today, but we're very much thinking of him. The other is the late Professor Elizabeth Adebayo, our survey supervisor for Adamawa State, who sadly passed away in April 2024. I will remember her kind hospitality when we visited Yola a couple of years ago, and her incredible commitment to this project and to the data gathering and her contribution to SNAG over the years. So thank you. Finally, I just wanted to thank my colleagues in the Chatham House Africa program, so Tigisti, Lisa, Jessica, and Anna for all of your hard work, and also the team back in London who have been supporting us with the Zoom. Thank you so much for all of your work in delivering this conference. Also to the Yar Adwa Center team for hosting us so well today. And once again to the MacArthur Foundation for your incredible support of the SNAG project. And with that, I'd just like to hand over to Dr. Kole for your final remarks. Thank you.
I think it was Mr. Babatunde who said that it was a setup for him to speak last in the panel conversation after hearing all those wonderful people who have more ideas and more inspiring. I think for me it's even a bigger plot to say the last word at this conference when we started with this high-level, inspiring, passionate people who really mobilized us and the two panels that we had. So what will I say that is actually interesting? I'm sure not much of what I'm going to say is interesting. But just to say that I think Chatham House has been one of our trusted partners in this journey. It is true that when we started in 2015, and I think that I used to talk to the two members of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption. Both of them are sociologists. The rest of them were lawyers. And the vice president was the one who invited us to be part of this journey. So I used to accuse them that, all of you are lawyers and you think that, we should only focus on law and order and criminology to fight this corruption. So in some ways it was repression to have another perspective against fight against corruption. And it's on this bend that I think we are very fortunate to have Chatham House that join us to look at different dimensions and different aspects of fighting corruption, to look at social norms as one of the important things that we should look at and other things. And I think that if we are going to reflect on what we have achieved collectively over the last 25 years or so, it's really the complexity of the issues and the different tools and different dimensions that we need to bring to the table if we are going to really fight against corruption itself. I think that, yes, President Obasanjo talked much about corruption, Buhari talked much about corruption, but all of them were military people who thought that all they had to do was to give orders and then everyone was going to follow us. I remember one of the moments when President Buhari said that, during my time, first of all, you are guilty before you are exonerated. But now under a civilian regime, it is the other way around. So it was easier for them to give the orders and expect all of us to follow them and make the change that we desire. But I think that the work around social norms, around values and others, which many of you here are involved in, really is one set of work that I think is critical and very important. So for me, I think when we look at the ecosystem and the density of the people who are doing a lot of work here, I think that many of you who are working with faith leaders, many of you who are working with children, many of you who are looking at media and journalism, many of you who are the civil society, naming and shaming, the criminal justice people, I think this complexity of tools that is there now is something that I think we have all achieved over the last 25 years. And I hope that if we are thinking about the next 25 years, is how do we also build all these institutions so that they can continue to be what they are, can be the ecosystem that will help us to reduce corruption. The last point I want to make clearly is what I always tell people that, look, the work that we are doing here is we are doing for only one reason. We want to see the lives of Nigerians improved. How do we improve the quality of lives of Nigerians? We are not interested in section A or B or section what of that. The real issue at the end of the day is that how do we ensure that ordinary Nigerians get the water that they deserve, get the education that they deserve, get the quality of services, deliveries that we all deserve as citizens of this country. So let's continue on this journey of fighting on behalf of ordinary people so that our citizens can be proud of being citizens of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And thank you, Chatham House, for being part of that journey and contribution as well. Thank you very much.